maybe not have mentioned was the fact that in the Philippines, each president only gets a 1 6-year term. So in this case, the president at this time, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., can't run for re-election. So now we have a situation where the former vice president, Sara Duterte, where the current vice president, Sara Duterte, is running against we don't know whom. So in 2022, Sara Duterte ran on the same ticket as Ferdinand Marcos Jr. And the two of them won by an overwhelming margin. And Sara, it was always felt that Sara had wanted to be the top, on the top ticket running for the president. And in the end, it was Sara who was the vice president. Very quickly after the inauguration, the so-called uni team, which was the term that they used during the campaign for Duterte and Marcos, fell apart, with Sara Duterte being dissatisfied with her role as the Secretary for Education. And at one point, she went on a late night television rant or on YouTube or Facebook, in which she stated that if something happened to her, that she had ordered a hitman to assassinate President Marcos. Well, this led to impeachment proceedings against Duterte, which were derailed because the Supreme Court regarded the case against her was flawed through procedural means. So at this point, Duterte seems to be the front runner for the president, but there are interesting questions and problems that she faces, and I'd be happy to talk about that.
And are there any legal or constitutional challenges that could affect her ability to run?
At present, I don't know of any that are. Although during the past several months there have been several. There's been an ongoing scandal regarding flood control, in which several politicians have been implicated. Although this seems to have implicated politicians from both sides of the political divide. In terms of constitutional barriers to Ms. Vice President Duterte's candidacy, I don't know of any.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim White, but please don't go too far, as we will be back with you very shortly. Japan's lower house has formally reappointed Sunee Takaichi as Prime Minister 10 days after her historic landslide victory in the snap elections. Takaichi, 64, made history in October when she became Japan's first woman premier. Her party went on to secure a 2/3 majority in the lower house vote held on February the 8th. Strengthening her grip on power, in her initial statements, Takaichi has said she wants to bolster Japan's military capabilities, a move that could further strain relations with China and raise regional tensions. At the same time, the newly reappointed Prime Minister faces pressure at home to revive Japan's sluggish economy, address rising living costs and stabilise public confidence. With a strong parliamentary mandate, Takaichi now begins a new term with broad authority, but also with major challenges on both the domestic and international fronts. We are now being rejoined by Jim Rice. Thank you for joining us back here today on News X World. So Takaichi has signalled plans to push more conservative policies. What are the potential impacts of these policies on social issues like immigration, defence and constitutional reform?
Okay, those are all excellent questions. Well, as you know, um, Japan's constitution, which was written immediately after the Second World War um, by the United States, has one of its sections prohibits the use of war, and so it's called the Peace Constitution. Although this has been reinterpreted over the past decade, Japan has been building up its military in large part in response to China's own military buildup, which is unprecedented. Um, and and in terms of the other question that you mentioned, in terms of immigration, Japan has always taken a very strong position against allowing foreign migrant long-term workers to settle in the Philippines. And in many ways, this has come as the population of the Philippines ages. It's now one of the oldest populations, and this is contributing to the economy slowing down over the past couple of decades. So the third thing, of course, is I think it ties back into the Philippines and the South China Sea, or what we here in the Philippines call the West Philippine Sea, because China poses a real threat not only to Taiwan, which of course we know about, but also to the Philippines, because China has encroached into the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. And during the Biden administration, his presidency built up an alliance between Japan, the Philippines, the United States, and Australia in order to try and deter further encroachment from the PRC. So these are challenges which the current Prime Minister of Japan now faces, and I hope she's able to manage these difficulties.
And what economic challenges and opportunities might Japan face under Takaichi's government, considering rising living costs and fiscal priorities?
Well, Japan is an advanced economy, and it's faced these kind of difficulties before. As many of your viewers know, Japan exports, but actually it tends to locate its factories, its manufacturing centers in the places where they sell their goods. So Japan has really become far more sophisticated in its management of supply chains. I would say that the biggest problem that Japan faces long term, though, is its demographic decline. And again, for various reasons, Japan has been reluctant to allow immigration.
And how might Takaichi's reappointment influence Japan's relationship with allies such as the United States and partners in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, again, that's a great question. I think that Takaichi's strong mandate, which has been given over the weekend in the lower house, puts her in a strong position to be able to further build up her relations with, the Trump administration. The problem is, at this point, very few people, certainly I, don't know the position that Trump is going to take regarding the Indo-Pacific. Will the Trump administration be engaged as Biden was during his tenure, or will Trump pull back? But if anyone can manage what is a very mercurial President Trump, it would be Takaichi.
Thank you so much, Jim Rice, for joining us here today on News Expert. It was a pleasure speaking with you today. Garbage has begun to pile up on street corners in the Cuban capital of Havana, attracting hordes of files and reeking of rotten food, in one of the most visible impacts of the US bid to prevent oil from reaching the Caribbean's largest island. Cuban authorities have reported that this month that only 44 of Havana's 106 rubbish trucks were able to keep operating due to fuel shortages, slowing garbage collection. Cardboard boxes, used bags, plastic bottles and rags have piled up on the street corners across the seafront capital as some residents sorted through the waste looking for scraps as they could be reused, while motorists, pedestrians and bikers are forced to circumvent the imposing heaps. Meanwhile, the UN spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric and some locals have reacted. Let's listen in to what they had to say.
The General's been following the situation in Cuba extremely closely, and I can tell you that he's very concerned about the situation in Cuba, and which is worsening as oil needs continue to be unmet. As you know, the General Assembly has consistently called for an end to the embargo imposed by the United States on Cuba. The Secretary General would like to see all parties pursue dialogue and respect for international law yet again. But our teams on the ground are working with the government to help support the humanitarian relief for the people of Cuba.
Mucho basurero. Y ahora con el problema del petróleo, más todavía. No sé, sugiero que muchachos que no trabajan, ¿viste? O los presos que están, que los saquen a recoger la basura, yo no sé, algo, porque el basurero no para. Y ahora con este problema del petróleo, mucho menos. ¿Vale? Él me entendió, para mí, no sé. Porque la verdad que con eso no salimos de los virus que hay. Vamos a salir nunca.
Aquí en La Habana, donde quiera el hay. No sé cómo será el problema energético, si es el problema de petróleo, si es el problema de qué, pero es así. Toda la basura esa, a mí me parece que eso deberían recogerlo, porque aquí hace más de como 10 días que no viene el carro y ya te estaba mirando. Por lo menos ahí son 7, 8 camiones.
We are now being joined by Collins Chong-Yu Keats, who's a Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joining us from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you for joining us here today on News X World. Who bears responsibility for Cuba's worsening conditions? External pressure from sanctions or internal economic and infrastructure challenges?
Well, we have seen how this is a mixture of both. We have seen this is also a systemic constraint domestically on the part of the regime in Cuba. We have seen how, of course, also the restriction in terms of access to financing, to shipping, insurance, refined fuel markets, and of course also this has produced further constraints, and on the part of the mobility of goods, as well as also contributing to the factor of the shortages of food. But we have seen how now fuel rationing is now being politically calibrated, and of course the risk of inflation, and of course the ripple effects on the people. But we have seen also how the systemic and structural effects of years and decades of these issues on being existing, and of course also the impact on energy infrastructure and all that. So we have seen how the recent days the impact of these restrictions and access, and there have also been this wariness on the part of traditional allies, including China and Russia, who both have been wary of providing further support system to Cuba, and of course also Russia is itself being restricted in terms of financial capacity, as well as China, who has also been wary of further deepening its presence in Cuba in terms of what has happened in the case of Venezuela. And this is the, of course, a mystery of a multi-pronged, multifactorial, capacity as to what has happened now in Cuba. But and we foresee that to continue at least for the days and weeks to come, unless there is this, profound changes on the part of how the response system will be. But as of now, we have seen how this volatility and the compounding impact of the U.S. sanctions have really, further, pushed Cuba into a tighter spot in this regard, Eileen.
And should international organisations such as the United Nations or humanitarian agencies intervene to address food, fuel, waste crisis in Cuba?
We have seen that before, and to no avail, unless there's this structural push domestically, and of course there's been little to no serious efforts being seen, and hence we have seen how the sanctions are still in place, and of course also it needs to have this systemic integration of efforts both domestically and also the injection of support externally. And of course for the time being, we have seen how this has been dire in terms of the situation on the ground for the people in Cuba, in terms of the collapse of this the long-term confidence in terms of the governance structure, in terms of the capacity and capability of the regime to provide the necessary control and support, especially in terms of food security, especially in terms of the availability of food supply to the people. Food rationing is a secondary crisis. Of course, we have seen how it's now being calibrated to ensure that the critical sectors are met in terms of the demands for fuel and foods, but the sentiments of the people in terms of ensuring minimum food availability, which will be critical to any regime stability. So energy blackouts are being tolerated more in terms of the acceptance level by the people, but in terms of food availability and empty food shelves, this is resonating, and this will be hugely impactful to the sentiments of the people. So the leadership understands that food scarcity and not the shortages of fuel or energy alone, which will trigger any potential social unrest. And of course, we have seen that before in the case of Sudan. It has been systemic, it has been endemic now, and for the case of Cuba, it remains to be seen now for the next this couple of days in this timeline. But of course, the U.S. sanctions are also a major test for the leadership in terms of how you respond to this, and also how reliable the traditional allies of Cuba will be in times like this. And we have seen that now. We have not seen that level of support being given for now.
Thank you so much, Colin Strong-Ukee, for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ellie.
On News Expert. Thank you. Warner Brothers Discovery has rejected a latest hostile bid from Paramount's Skydance, but has given the rival studio 7 days to submit a best and final offer that could top its existing deal with Netflix. The Paramount offer values Warner Brothers at about $30 a share, with discussions even touching on a possible $31. However, Warner Brothers said its board does not believe the Paramount proposal is likely to be superior to its agreement with Netflix, and said it remains fully committed to that transaction. Under the terms of the deal, Paramount has until February the 23rd to improve its offer, which Netflix would then be allowed to match. The competing bids highlight intense consolidation pressures in the global entertainment industry, with control of Warner Brothers' vast film and television library at stake. A shareholder vote on the Netflix deal is scheduled for March 20th, as activists, investors and regulators closely watch the outcome. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. in the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Shares facilitated and oil prices dropped back down as Tehran gives an encouraging response during talks with US officials in Geneva on Iran's nuclear program after days of escalating tension from President Donald Trump. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said a new window of opportunity has opened. Negotiators from Ukraine and Russia concluded the first day of the US-mediated peace talks in Geneva, with the US President Donald Trump pressing Kyiv to act fast to reach a deal to end the four-year conflict. A frantic search is underway for 10 backcountry skiers missing in an avalanche in the mountains of California, where a huge storm dumped heavy snow. Officials say a group of 16 people, 4 guides and 12 clients, were caught up in the avalanche. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said ties between India and France are very special after talks with President Emmanuel Macron during his 3-day visit for the AI summit. Armed group Hezbollah rejected the Lebanese government's decision to grant the army at least 4 months to advance the second phase of a nationwide disarmament plan, saying it would not accept what it sees as a move serving Israel. Millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein suggest the existence of a global criminal enterprise that carried out acts meeting the legal threshold of crimes against humanity, according to a panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council. DNA from a glove found near Nancy Guthrie's Arizona home failed to score a match in a national database of genetic profiles. The outcome, announced by the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI, marked a major setback for investigators as the search for the 84-year-old mother stretched into its 17th day. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is building an artificial intelligence accountability program as his first office probes Elon Musk's XAI over the generation of non-consensual sexually explicit images. Bonta moved quickly last month to send a cease and desist letter to XAI as regulators globally investigated the company. And for your top story this hour, US military officials say American forces killed 11 people after striking 3 alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific, marking one of the deadliest days so far in the Trump administration's maritime campaign. The strikes carried out by US Southern Command bring the total number of deaths from similar operations to at least 145 since September, when US President Donald Trump ordered action against people labeled as narco-terrorists. The military says intelligence confirmed the boats were operating along known drug trafficking routes, adding that no US forces were hurt. However, rights groups, including the Washington Office on Latin America, have questioned the legality of the strikes, warning they could amount to the extrajudicial killings without due process. The operations come amid heightened US military activity in Latin America waters and continue to draw sharp international security. We are now being joined by retired Major General Sudhakar Ji, who's a senior geopolitical and strategic defence expert, joining us from Jaipur. Thank you so much for joining us here today on News X World. So the US military says it targeted 3 boats it believed were involved in the drug trafficking route, killing 11 people. How do we assess the evidence and intelligence used to justify these lethal strikes?
Good morning, Ellie. Thank you for inviting me for your show. Simply, there is no way to justify. It's highly illegal. It doesn't have any evidence. Even if they have some presumptions, do you kill people based on the presumptions? That is where the international rule of law comes into question. So I'm afraid I also would join NewsX World channel to call it out that this mindless killing of people without any evidence based on the premise that they are terrorists. Were they armed? Have they fired at any innocent civilians? Have they perpetrated any kind of crime except for the presumption that they are drug traffickers? Drug traffickers also is based on some intelligence which the American agencies have harnessed, or they have accumulated or collated from the environment, which is not known to the open society and open sources. Therefore, there is a big question. Back to Eli.
The strikes are part of a broader campaign against alleged narco-terrorists, but critics argue this raises serious legal and ethical questions. Should the US be using military force in this way in international waters?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't know, because day before yesterday, I suppose, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed very high dignitaries in Munich in the conference. He spoke about neo-imperialism. Is this what the world drifting into in 21st century? That is, and is this world supposed to be supported by such kind of killing of innocent people without any evidence, just purely based on imagination or the inputs which they have, the world doesn't know? So in my opinion, it is highly incorrect, and the rule of law as relevant and applicable in the world order today, despite the geopolitical churn and unpredictability and uncertainty, and I still feel that some agency in the world, the entire world, has to get together collectively. They have to raise the question, because this cannot go on. And if you allow me further, to me it appears that this is a kind of a method to distract the domestic pressures which are building up on Donald Trump. One is towards Iran, the second one is here, third one is not moving making any headway towards Ukraine. These are the promises, the two of them that he promised to bring an end to the mindless conflict was the Ukraine war and the conflict in the Middle East. Nothing is happening. No substantive kind of progress has been made. So to open up a new front is mere a question of, I would say, distracting the domestic constituency so that the survival of the political authority continues without any questions of accountability. The last point I have is, well, the superpower has done many such kind of killing of people in numerous campaigns, whether it is Vietnam or Afghanistan or Syria or Libya. So then does the world close its eyes to such kind of killing of innocent people without any sufficient evidence? When are we going to raise voice against injustice being meted out in 21st century? Is this the new imperialism that one is talking of and aiming for? Certainly the answer is no. And therefore, does it mean that the whole world order is to accept this new normal as a way of life? Again, the answer is no. Then what is it that logically one should be doing? One should be collectively calling it out and voice a concern and bring this mindless killing of people in the Caribbean Sea to an end, or hold United States accountable in the apex organization of United Nations Security Council or in the General Assembly or in some form. And media also has to play a very important role. I am afraid the Western media is not taking serious cognizance of the entire issue. Back to you, Ellie.
And with at least 145 lives lost in similar operations since late 2025, how should international law and human rights considerations shape responses to transnational crime like drug smuggling, especially when this level of military action causes civilian casualties?
United States is the primary agency which went on to create, after the collapse of League of Nations, an organization called as United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council. And along with that, at different timelines, multiple global organizations came into existence. And the last one, if I respect my memory, was the World Trade Organization, 1997 or so, close to that timeline. Now, amongst all these, the International Court of Justice also came into existence. Without superpowers' support and initiative, this couldn't have come into existence. The Human Rights Organization. What are these organizations doing? Aren't they actually seized with this situation? They are the ones who have to hold the USA accountable. And towards that end, the media also has to play a very important role. With regard to the brilliant question which you have asked, how do you pinpoint? Well, what more do you expect or want to pinpoint not an allegation or serious offense against the humanity? Here, people moving in one or two or three boats, they straight away they are being engaged with precision-guided lethal weapon systems. They are being destroyed. There is no chance to afford them any kind of opportunity to defend themselves. The rule of law always provides an opportunity for the accused to defend himself. You have not given a chance to these people. You have based your military actions based on presumptions of drug trafficking, and mindful of the fact that Venezuela, as on today, going by the latest articulations in the United Nations concerning agency, is not one of those circuits which provides drugs. Drugs are being provided through Colombia, through Mexico, into USA. I'm talking about fentanyl. What is coming from Venezuela, maybe at a pinch, maybe the cocaine, 250, I'm told, tons of cocaine has been supplied in previous year. And the value of it, 1 ton, is around 25 billion. If that is true, and if it is supported by evidence, well, that could possibly become one of the reasons. And Maduro has been picked up middle of the night. He's been hijacked along with his wife. This is a very serious criminal offense that we can expect in the rule of law. So all this put together, it is very difficult to actually come to a solution as of now, because it's a serious subject. It is mounting by the day and going on into extreme situations. This must be brought to an end. First, we must adopt a solution spectrum. The solution spectrum should be contain, counter, and contest. Containment would have firstly stopped wherever it is no further engagement of such kind of movement of boats without sufficient proof. That is how we contain it. We stop United States from engaging militarily, one. And how do you counter it? To counter it, it is a medium-term kind of an option. You must have media, you must have global agencies coming together, you must have the leading economists, you must have the global south coming together and speaking in one voice. And last but not the least, there is the International Court of Justice which must actually play its role. Back to you, Eli.
Thank you so much, Sadakaji, but don't go too far as we will be coming back to you very soon. US Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the world needs to concentrate on its current energy needs as net zero was never going to happen, and that all the current climate policies aren't doing anything to move the needle on climate change. He also stated that the climate cult has weakened Europe, driven up energy prices and moved jobs to Asia. He has added that it has reduced economic opportunities for Europeans, made it harder to pay their bills, and has made them very dependent on Russia. Let's in fact listen in to what the US Energy Secretary had to say.
The Paris net zero thing, like net zero is never 2050. That's never going to happen. It never was going to happen. But it's been a program to grow the role of the government, to make energy more expensive, and send industry out of Europe over to Asia. That's a crazy policy. Yeah. So globally, over the last century, we've increased atmospheric CO2 concentration by about 50%. That's been sort of a side effect of the modern world. We're radically wealthier, we live longer, we have dramatically more opportunities, and the world is getting a little bit warmer. CO2 emissions contribute. Energy makes people's lives better. And sort of the experiment the last 17 years, I think rightfully called the climate cult, has just driven up the price of energy. Europe as a whole produces less energy today than it did 17 years ago, and prices are dramatically higher. It's just moved jobs overseas to Asia. It's reduced economic opportunities for Europeans. It's made it harder to pay their bills. It made them very dependent on Russia. We want a strong, powerful, industrial, wealthy, prosperous Europe.
A panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council has stated that millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein suggest the existence of a global criminal enterprise that carried out acts meeting the legal threshold of crimes against humanity. According to the panel, crimes outlined in documents released by the US Justice Department were committed against a backdrop of supremacist beliefs, racism, corruption, and extreme misogyny. The experts said the allegations contained in the files require an independent, thorough, and impartial investigation, and said inquiries should also be launched into how it was possible for such crimes to be committed and for so long. We are now being joined by Shruti Dasgupta, who's an international affairs analyst, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. The UN-appointed panel said the evidence in the Epstein files suggests a global criminal enterprise. Whose actions could meet the legal definitions of crimes against humanity? What criteria do experts use to reach that determination? And how might this shape international understanding of this case?
Well, there's no standard definition that could fit directly in this case, because crimes against humanity generally encase mass murder or starvation, which generally leads into loss of millions of life or deterioration of a particular segment of people, ethnicity of people. So, of course, mostly which come under the watch of genocide. So, technically speaking, it would not really truly qualify as crimes against humanity, but if you're only looking at the files, which is the 3 million documents which have 2,000 videos and 180,000 odd emails and pictures, you would realize that although there is a limited number of victims, there are about 1,200 victims that got doxxed with the way that these particular tranches were released. The redactions were imperfect. The information only protected the people who actually perpetrated those crimes rather than the victims. But if you look at the fallout, who were meeting with them? Economists, businessmen, academia, technocrats, politicians. So basically, every kind of power monger, knowledge broker that could ever be in existence was meeting, greeting, and dealing with Epstein and his cohorts. So what I find might be a small number of women, But the fallout of their actions affected all of humanity because it was not restricted to one particular island or even USA. He was meeting with people all over Europe, in Asia, in Africa, everybody. With the only exceptions that I have found there to being at least 300 names, I believe the list has been released by US government where they've named people who were too frequently either meeting with him or writing with him and dealing with Epstein. So the only people I don't find there is probably the North Korean dictators or the Chinese CCP. Apart from them, I think everybody has some way or the other been featured either as a resource to be exploited or engaged with, or as a person who wanted to exploit resources and have access to the particular supply chains that Epstein had put out. These would affect all of humanity. That means most nations had policymakers, had businessmen dealing with a man who is a known sex offender, who allegedly died by suicide, but right now it looks more like silenced to me at my end. So this is what shows that it could be a crime against humanity, though not directly claiming lives of a large number of human beings, but directly affecting the way the lives of millions and billions of people were run just because the policymakers were corrupt or had proclivities that led to really deviant tastes which were entertained by Epstein.
And the panel recommended an independent, thorough and impartial investigation into how such atrocities could have continued for such a long time. What legal and diplomatic challenges would such an investigation face? And do you think this would be a bit of a relief for the victims who were let down, like you said, in these files when they were, their names weren't redacted, but other big, powerful names were?
Well, look at the timeline. This has been operating. These were news more than 20 years ago. This was happening more than 20 years ago. Although justice should be delivered to every single victim, we have a saying that if justice is delayed by so long, it is actually justice has been denied to the victim. So even though the UN would probably constitute a special segment where they'll take in neutral parties from all nations who will go through all the filth in the unredacted format that is available with the US government and find the people who have been dealing in these power broking corridors and make them pay for misusing power to such an extent that they actually went this dark path. But that would take time again. That means that already justice that has been for 20 years in waiting has to wait another couple of years more. By the time, how many of those victims would actually want to go and revisit that part of their lives, go back for their statements all over again? And the US government has decided not to pursue any particular actions on the released files. They have declared that there will be no new cases filed under the name of Epstein's, under the banner of Epstein files. So that shows that the US government is not entertaining any new legal actions just because the tranches have been released. The other governments, of course, are taking a stand. At least people are being dismissed from their posts. There are investigations being launched. So these are the diplomatic actions that we can expect. If you are named and there is credible evidence that you were dealing with Epstein and his groups to ensure that policies favored you and your nation, then you should answer for it. And if you were actually present on that island and enjoying those really depraved acts, then there should be a criminal investigation into you. So these are things that at least European nations have seen that are trying to enact. US, of course, is not. And that is in itself a big question whether the true perpetrators would ever actually face justice system in the USA or abroad. So what I find is that UN can make the noises, ensure that they stand with the victim, but the actual authority to act on the people who really truly were doing it are actually sitting in the power corridors of USA today, namely Trump, Melania, and Lutnick and others. So there were people who are still in power who dealt with Epstein and are shameless about it.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for joining us here today and giving your insights on News X World. French President Emmanuel Macron and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday unveiled India's first H-125 helicopter assembly line, marking a major step in defence and aerospace cooperation between the two countries. The facility has been set up under a joint venture between Airbus and Tata Advanced Systems and is part of a new agreement aimed at expanding manufacturing under India's Make in India push. India and France also agreed to jointly manufacture Hammer Precision guided missiles in India, further deepening strategic defence ties. Macron, who is on a 3-day visit to India, held bilateral talks with Modi in Mumbai, where both leaders emphasised technology transfer, industrial collaboration and long-term partnership. Officials say the deals reflect growing trust between New Delhi and Paris and position India as a key hub for global defence and aerospace manufacturing. UN spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric has warned that nearly 3 years into Sudan's war, the region is facing an unprecedented displacement crisis, with humanitarian needs far overstripping available sources. Dujarric has said that the conflict has involved almost daily drone attacks on civilians, forcing millions to flee their homes across Sudan and into neighbouring countries. Let's listen in.
فتح الطريق لكادوغلي ومبروك لأهلنا في كادوغلي أنه وصول القوات المسلحة إليه. القوات المسلحة ستصل إلى أي مكان في السودان.
Nearly 3 years into the devastating war in Sudan, including almost daily drone attacks on civilians, the region faces an unprecedented displacement crisis with humanitarian needs outpacing available resources. To meet these growing needs, the UN Refugee Agency and 123 of our partners are urgently seeking $1.6 billion to provide food, shelter, healthcare protection, and dignified support for 5.9 million people across 7 countries neighboring Sudan by year's end. The plan also promotes longer-term solutions, such as helping governments, including refugees in national systems, and expand access to services. Host governments and local communities continue to demonstrate remarkable solidarity. However, their capacity is being pushed to the brink, underscoring the need for a consecutive 4th annual appeal on this scale. We continue to call for stronger international backing to address the persistent underfunding of humanitarian operations in the countries hosting people fleeing Sudan, and we await a lasting peace. And we reiterate once again, especially in light of the continuing attacks on civilians, for the parties to respect international law and to never target civilians, health infrastructure, religious sites.
Meanwhile, Sudanese Army's chief has also responded. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
فتح الطريق لكادوغلي ومبروك لأهلنا في كادوغلي أنه وصول القوات المسلحة إليه. القوات المسلحة ستصل إلى أي مكان في السودان. الله أكبر.
We are now being rejoined again by retired Major General Sudhakar Ji. Thank you for joining us back here on NewsX World. So critics argue that humanitarian funding for Sudan has lagged despite it being one of the world's largest displacement crises. What factors explain this persistent underfunding, and how might the global community be encouraged to step up and support?
Once again, a very brilliant question raised by you. Reading between the lines, if I may respond to your question, it has got a global perspective. That is, there are global players who are involved in this conflict. That's why the conflict is not coming to an end. there are regional dynamics. You see, there is a question of dominance. And the third one is there is a local politics of dominating each other within the organization, within the architecture of Sudan. When you talk about the global dynamics,
what we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran has not agreed to all the red lines set out by US President Donald Trump for a diplomatic solution. Vice President J.D. Vance said after talks in Geneva, Vance appeared to indicate that the United States was still interested in diplomacy after Trump threatened forces if Iran's clerical state does not agree on key concerns, starting with its nuclear program. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators are resuming a second round of peace talks in Geneva today, as US envoy Steve Witkoff said that talks had brought about meaningful progress in the Washington-led drive to end Europe's biggest war since World War II. A frantic search is underway for 10 backcountry skiers missing in an avalanche in the mountains of California, where a huge storm dumped heavy snow. Officials say a group of 16 people, 4 guides and 12 clients were caught up in the avalanche. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said ties between India and France are very special after talks with President Emmanuel Macron during his 3-day visit for the AI summit. Armed group Hezbollah rejected the Lebanese government's decision to grant the army at least 4 months to advance the second phase of a nationwide disarmament plan, saying it would not accept what it sees as a move serving Israel. Millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein suggest the existence of a global criminal enterprise that carried out acts meeting the legal threshold of crimes against humanity, according to a panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council. The Vatican will not participate in US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace initiative. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's top diplomatic official, said, while adding that efforts to handle crisis situations should be managed by the United Nations. Pope Leo, the first US Pope and critic of some of Trump's policies, was invited to join the board in January. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is building an artificial intelligence accountability program as his office probes Elon Musk's XAI over the generation of non-consensual sexually explicit images. Bonta moved quickly last month to send a cease and desist letter to XAI as regulators globally investigated the company. And for your top story this hour, Downing Street confirms that UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer spoke with US President Donald Trump last night. The discussion focused on ongoing Ukraine negotiations and efforts to deliver a just and lasting peace. Both leaders also reaffirmed their commitment to promoting stability and peace in the Middle East. Officials say the talks were friendly and constructive, aimed at strengthening bilateral cooperation. This phone call comes as the United States held nuclear talks with Iran yesterday. The United States is also in continued trilateral talks with Russia and Ukraine to reach a peace deal. Both these talks have taken place in Geneva. We are now being joined by Dr. Gilbert Doctorow, who is a Russian affairs expert joining us from Brussels. Thank you for joining us here today on NewsX World. How do the British and American approaches to the Ukraine conflict align or differ? And what challenge does that pose for diplomatic negotiations?
They differ. The British are doing their very best to disrupt the peace talks by influencing the Ukrainian negotiators and insisting that they not accede to the Russian demands for evacuation, withdrawal from Donbass. Yesterday's Russian state news had their European bureau chief outside the Hotel Intercontinental in Geneva shortly after the talks ended, and shared with the audience some of what she saw and heard, which included pictures of Mr. Starmer's deputy, a very close advisor to him on security matters, who was sitting in the lounge of the Intercontinental, waiting for the Ukrainians to come out so that he could grab them and confer. And confer here means, as I said, ensure that they not make compromises and that the talks fail. Therefore, your commentary about the friendly nature of the conversation between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer last night is showing the public face, which is amity. We're all in this together, when behind that reality is the two sides are pulling in opposite directions. The Americans in one way, the British in the other.
And in what ways could these high-level dialogues influence ongoing peace talks with Russia? And what diplomatic or military leverage do the UK and US bring to the table?
Well, the UK brings very little normal, conventional military leverage to the talks. Britain's armed forces are pitifully small compared to Russia's. So that is out of discussion. But Britain has been a spoiler. Britain has been a collaborator in sabotage, in assassinations, and in other dirty works that the Ukrainian forces have inflicted on Russia's generals, on Russia's nuclear triad, and so forth. So the British role has been significant, even if its own military forces have not been committed to this war. In this sense, as I say, Mr. Trump and Mr. Starmer are keeping up appearances. They would like to maintain the fiction of close national coordination and shared interests. The reality, of course, is quite different, as I just suggested. The position coming out of the Observer, the news reporter from Russian state television, was that there is a split within the Ukrainian delegation, and that the nominal head of the delegation, former head of Ukrainian military intelligence, and since several weeks, the head of the presidential administration of Mr. Zelensky, Mr. Budanov, is saying, give the Russians all of the Donbass now, get it over with, and let's move on. While others in the delegation are true to the predecessor of Mr. Budanov as head of the presidential administration, Mr. Umerov, who insists that no concessions should be made to the Russians, and that is the line that Mr. Zelensky publicly took last night.
And beyond Ukraine, Starmer and Trump reportedly discussed stability in the Middle East. What shared priorities and differences might have emerged in those discussions?
On the case of Iran, I think the positions of the United States and Britain are probably much closer than what we've just been discussing over Russia, Ukraine. I think that neither side wants to see a conflagration that would close the Straits of Hormuz, that would inflict enormous economic damage on global oil trade. So I think that genuinely they could be reading from the same choir book, from the same scores with respect to Iran.
Thank you so much, Gilbert, but please don't go too far, as we will be back with you very shortly. Iran and Russia are set to conduct joint naval drills in the Sea of Oman and northern Indian Ocean. The drills, part of a long-standing maritime security belt series, aim to improve cooperation between the two nations to counter maritime security threats and combat maritime terrorism. Iranian Navy Commander Hassan Magaduslo has stated that the drills could focus on coordinating in addressing security challenges. This exercise reflects a deepening military partnership between Tehran and Moscow, especially amid growing geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. The drills come after Iran's Revolutionary Guards conducted military exercises in the Strait of Hormuz earlier this week, a crucial global shipping route for oil exports. Analysts see this growing military cooperation as part of a broader strategic alignment between Russia and Iran, both of whom seek to challenge Western influence in the region and assert control over key maritime trade routes. We are now being joined again by Dr. Gilbert. Thank you for joining us back here on NewsX World. What strategic message are Iran and Russia sending by conducting coordinated naval drills in the Sea of Oman and northern Indian Ocean? And how might this influence regional security dynamics?
I think that these naval exercises were scheduled long in advance of the present crisis in the Middle East. But they're being used to bear on that crisis. After all, the United States has its single aircraft carrier task force in place, is bringing a second task force in place, a second aircraft carrier, all to exert enormous pressure on Iran for the sake of the negotiations that are proceeding with respect to uranium enrichment, and, if the United States hopes, to other issues on its agenda, which otherwise the Iranians reject. Nonetheless, the key issue is the enrichment, and that is under negotiation, and America is trying to influence it by its show of strength. The Russian presence there is symbolic, but it bears not only on it bears less on the reality of the negotiating situation with respect to Iran than it bears on the negotiating situation with respect to Ukraine. You'll have to note that both negotiations over Iran and over Ukraine were taking place in Geneva yesterday with the same American negotiators, Witkoff and Kushner. That's not an accident. These two crises and negotiations are interrelated. It is fairly clear to me, at least, that Mr. Putin threatened Trump. This goes back a week and a half ago, that if you proceed with an attack on Iran, then there will be no further negotiations over Ukraine. So from the Russian standpoint, the issues are intimately linked. The real backer of Iran in the crisis, of course, is not Russia. It is China. China has, in the past few months, supplied Iran with an ecosystem of detection, the world's most unique radars that look over the horizon to 700 kilometers and can detect America's special aircraft that are supposedly invisible to radar. This plus satellite imagery and satellite tracking of American military assets in the waters of the Middle East are invaluable for Iran's defense. But China has a much bigger interest in Iran staying whole and safe than Russia does. The Chinese receive 1.4 million barrels of oil a day from Iran, which is critical to the functioning of the Chinese economy. Therefore, it is understandable that the Chinese have put up much more military support for Iran than Russia has.
And how do these joint naval exercises reflect broader trends in military cooperation between Moscow and Tehran? And what implications might this have for global power balances? Also, could this be involving China and other regional actors?
Well, in general, China has brought its naval assets into the region, including a special equipped ship that is equivalent to American air surveillance of the region. This provides Iran with very effective, usable, real-time information for targeting American naval vessels that are in movement in the region. So, as I say, the Chinese, in terms of military assistance, are a far bigger factor. Nonetheless, the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians all are supposed to be participating in various naval exercises during this time period. As to the level of alliance, the Russians have no military pact with Iran. This is all being arranged on an impromptu ad hoc basis because the two parties decided it was safer not to have such a military alliance in place, going back to December, January, when the Iranians of the incoming Trump administration still had the illusion, hope, that a deal could be reached with Trump and the sanctions would be lifted on Iran, which was a much greater reward than anything that the Russians could give them. That, of course, fell away. We know that Mr. Trump came in threatening Iran, attacking Iran, and it's taken a while for the sides to come back together at the negotiating table. But still, the Russians do not have a military alliance with Iran. They will not have, obviously. The Chinese, neither do the Chinese. But de facto, as I say, for the reasons of China's dependence on Iranian oil, the Chinese are giving very substantial military assistance to Iran, which makes an American attack unlikely, if almost one could say impossible.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gilbert, Dr. O, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It was lovely speaking to you. Australia has announced it will temporarily ban one of its citizens held in a Syrian camp from returning home. This decision comes under rarely used powers aimed at preventing potential terror activity. 34 Australians, including children, are held in the northern Syrian facility, many linked to families of suspected Islamic State terrorists. Authorities say some were briefly freed but turned back by Damascus over inadequate paperwork. Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke confirmed one individual received a temporary exclusion order based on security advice. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said some members had aligned with a brutal ideology, but children are not responsible for their parents' actions. The potential return has sparked debate in Australia as support for the right-wing One Nation party hits record levels. The government continues to assess security risks before allowing anyone else to return. We are now being joined by retired Major General Gigi Davidi, who is a war veteran and professor of international relations and strategic studies, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you. So, How does Australia balance national security concerns with its legal obligation to allow citizens to return to their home country?
Well, Ellie, it's always a challenge because national security is very paramount, and especially, over the last couple of months, there have been number of cases in Australia, and one was the recent one in Sydney, where the father-son duo had, caused a couple of casualties with their firearms, and the son had a record of links with certain terrorist organizations. So to that extent, I think the government had enacted a law in 2019, which has the legal, provisions to bar people who have suspected or doubtful record. And now this is exactly the case which is now being applied for people who are in custody in Syria, who have links with ISIS. But ironically, even the children are affected, and rightly so, when the Prime Minister Albanese said that how can you blame children for the acts of their parents or their guardians? So therefore, I think Australia has to balance it out, and they have to deal case by case, because it cannot be dealt across the board. They have to see case by case and see how each case actually is to be handled. And of course, the law is there, but law cannot be applied across the spectrum. So I'm sure the security agencies will take a call and see each case, how it is to be handled. And now in this case, they have actually stopped the entry of one of these persons who is held up there. And there are, as I said, 34 of them. So they'll have to be dealt case by case. But nonetheless, the national security very paramount, and especially so when Australia had number of cases of shooting and terrorist-related violence. Ellie.
And what are the ethical and humanitarian implications of banning someone? Like you said, these are children. So they're banning women and children from returning home, especially when they are in these big conflict zones like Syrian detention camps.
Absolutely, Ali, because human rights always clash when the security is concerned, and many times it is the children or some relatives who are not connected with the, either the people who are suspected or who are involved in such cases. But then again, one has to take a call case by case, because after all, the children are vulnerable and they are dependent upon their parents, and if they are either they are held back or they are not allowed to join in, then it also comes the concern as to who will look after them. So this is a very delicate and sensitive issue. This has to be handled both through the legal means and also through the compassion, through the empathy. Now that's where the line has to be drawn, because many a times you have to circumvent the legal issues on the ethical grounds, and ethical issues have to be many a time seen from the prism of security. So I think this is a very sensitive issue. It has to be tackled case by case, and more than that, I think empathic, or at least the compassionate, concern must be given in, or at least must be taken care of, because law cannot be stringently applied, and there's always a human angle to it. And in this case too, I think this has to be seen both from the legal and also from the humanitarian perspective. Ellie.
Thank you, but please don't go too far, as I will be joining back with you very shortly. US Vice President James David Vance has said that he worries about how companies use artificial intelligence. Vance has added that he is worried about the companies using artificial intelligence to surveil Americans. Vance has also said that he is worried about invasions of privacy, and he is also worried about political businesses. We are now being rejoined by retired Major General Gigi Davidi. Thank you for joining us back here today on News X World. What role should regulation play in controlling how companies use AI for data collection, trafficking and surveillance? And what are the risks of over-regulation versus under-regulation?
Well, Ali, I think one sees the concerns of Vice President wants, they are well founded, because today companies are using artificial intelligence extensively to carry out their functioning, and this also brings along the risk of surveillance on the Americans, both as far as the organization are concerned, as well also the individual. I can give you certain cases in point, like Palantir technology. It provides information using AI to the agency like FBI, ICE, or even the Department of Defense, or let's say the flock safety. Now they have a network where they provide information on the license number plate through the cameras which use the AI, or you can take Amazon Ring, which are connected for these. AI is connected with the residences. They have the cameras installed, and where they give real-time information to the police and the criminal handling centers. So the point is that AI is being used extensively, and the data is available with the companies. Now this comes an ethical issue, and not only that, even the companies like Walmart or Starbucks, they use AI startups to keep a watch, or at least do surveillance on their employees and their communication. So the point is that I think there have to be rules and regulations which, at one hand, ensure that the security of the nation is not compromised. At the same time, you have to balance it out, that the privacy of the citizens, of the organization, is again, handled or not compromised with these security agencies or by using AI. So it's again a very catch-22 situation, where at one hand you have to ensure the security of your organization, of your country, and at the same time you have to also ensure that the privacy of the citizens or certain organization is not compromised. So therefore laws have to be brought in which actually take care of both the dimensions. Ali.
Thank you so much, Gigi Davidi, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It was a pleasure speaking with you. Kenya and the United States will resume negotiations next week in Washington, aimed at reaching a bilateral trade deal, according to Kenyan Trade Minister Lee King-Anjui. King-Anjui said the talks will run from Monday through to Thursday, with 1 or 2 additional meetings expected after that to finalise deliberations. The East African nation exported about $737 million worth of goods to the United States in 2024, accounting for around 10% of its total exports. Kenya and Washington first began the process in 2020 during the first term of US President Donald Trump, with talks held last August to protect market access. Negotiations were later expanded under former President Joe Biden to address non-tariff barriers, but were left unfinished before Trump returned to office. The United States has moved more than 50 fighter jets towards the Middle East in the past 24 hours, as Washington and Iran are holding high-stakes nuclear talks in Geneva. The aircraft include F-22, F-35 and F-16 jets, along with several refueling planes tracked by social media accounts that monitor military flights. Flight tracking data in recent days also showed unusually heavy movement of US air power towards bases in Europe and the Middle East. As per US officials, the military build-up also includes continued deliveries of US air defense systems to the region. In fact, several American units already deployed in the Middle East that were due to rotate out in the coming weeks have had their deployments extended. Today is day 3 of the AI Impact Summit 2026 in the national capital of India. Kicking off with Research Symposium, the summit will bring together leading academics, researchers and think tanks to present cutting-edge AI research, new methodologies and evidence-based policy insights. On February the 19th, the official summit opens with an invite-only inaugural ceremony at the Bharat Mandapam Convention Centre, inaugurated by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The summit will feature various sessions, including a leaders' plenary and CEOs' roundtable, both of which will be addressed by PM Modi. In attendance are prominent tech leaders like Sundar Pichai, CEO of Google and Alphabet, who is in Delhi for the summit. Pichai tweeted sharing his enthusiasm for the event. According to Union Minister Ashwani Vishwanar, around 250,000 people attended the event on February the 17th, highlighting the event's scale and significance. Among the major figures making headlines is Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft. Gates has confirmed to deliver his keynote address on February the 19th. His participation had sparked speculation after his name briefly disappeared from the list of speakers. But a spokesperson from the Gates Foundation confirmed his attendance. His keynote will likely focus on the intersection of AI, global developments and sustainability. The summit promises to be a vital gathering for shaping the future of AI, with discussions ranging from AI ethics and sustainability to the impact of AI in emerging economies and policy frameworks. Now, our correspondent Arzu Seth, who is intensively covering the AI Impact Summit at the Bharat Mandapam, has spoken to Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Mr. Tarimas Valis. Let's cut across.
Well, India is hosting AI Summit 2026 and we are at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. And joining us, a very special guest, he is the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. Sir, thank you so much for talking to NewsX. So first of all, let me begin with your experience of, first global summit in the Global South, the AI Impact Summit. How is your experience going on?
So far, so good. It's my first time in India. So I'm very excited to be here. I think that this topic is very important that we're discussing today. Everybody has been touched by AI, in everyday's routine, for like more and more. It's just very important to have a proper understanding about like potential risks, potential opportunities, and how can we manage, and make the whole phenomenon, as useful as is possible for the society.
Also, Lithuania is known for its strength in fintech and digital public infrastructure. So how do you see the collaboration between India and Lithuania in AI-driven financial ecosystem?
Of course, we have different, market players that show interest in Lithuanian, infrastructure and priorities, for fintech. We're getting more and more interest, for multiple international market players, and obviously India is the biggest, country on earth, by population. Obviously, they have, a lot of, things to offer, and we believe we can get more and more like interest from India into our fintech, sector.
So when we talk about the Western countries, they mainly focus on gaming, use of AI in gaming and other things. But when it comes to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's approach, he talks about AI for healthcare, AI for welfare of the people. AI should reach to every person till the last person. So how did you see that approach of Prime Minister Narendra Modi?
I think it's a very, very like promising and right approach, because the more we involve different AI solutions into our overall areas, including healthcare and other that you mentioned before, we can eliminate like human error, and we can, allocate more and more of creativity potential of humans into other areas. So instead of like doing some kind of technical activities, we can use the AI in order to have more, opportunities for human like creativity, instead of just, having some technical, activities.
Minister, as we talk, the European Union has taken lead in AI Act. So how did you see the, India's approach to AI regulations?
Well, obviously, we must be responsible regarding AI. We all understand that, something that emerges without like restrictions, it might have like negative, circumstances. And obviously, EU regulation, is sometimes maybe it's too strict. Sometimes we need more like flexibility if you want to be competitive in global terms. But obviously, it's about like, making sure that, there will not be as many negative circumstances, with the whole phenomenon. So overall efforts from India's side in order to follow, what the EU is doing, it just opens, more opportunities for Indian, marketplace in EU markets. So I think it's impossible to do other way or like just ignore, this kind of trend.
Also, Minister, how important is trusted technology supply chain between India and Lithuania?
Of course, it's important, because if you can't trust, your like the whole supply chain, elements, it's challenging, to build trust, on behalf of the consumers, so like everything matters. It's just a part of like sustainable, approach.
Also, if you talk about the technology supply chain, as far as the...
That's also like, a part of the same approach, Being sustainable is also like, one of the parameters of becoming, more competitive nowadays, because consumers like always thinks about it.
Also, if you see, most of the stalls, exhibition, the participants have come from the global world. So how did you see India's representing themselves as the AI hub for AI?
Of course, nowadays the world is just becoming, very small, You just, jump on a plane, you sleep 1 hour like myself, today, and you're like here in India, Then, I think, it's a very international event, we have a lot of participants from like other, areas. And this allows us to be like, updated about like, the latest trends, because, the world never sleeps, it's always coming with different, initiatives. So the more proactive we are, like we're sharing our knowledge, we're like sharing, multiple trends, the more efficient, the whole trend is, and it's more down to earth.
Well, so finally, a big deal, a free trade deal happened with the EU and India, between EU and India. So how do you see, because it is being said the mother of all deal, so how it is going to benefit both the countries?
I think both of the regions, will benefit, obviously, because, we're talking about, the biggest, country in terms of consumers, and like on the other side, we're speaking about, one of the largest, one of the most competitive areas in the world, and the more intensive cooperation we have, the more diversified expert, areas we have, and we cannot focus just on one area. It's always nice to have like, diversification for our like experts and goods, so like we believe that EU will have a lot of benefit from this, just like India will have also, more, trust on behalf of the EU market. So I think both sides will benefit.
So my last question to you will be, what are your expectations from the AI Impact Summit 2026 that is happening right now, that is going on right now in New Delhi, and also, how, Lithuania and India is going to work together in the future for the AI innovations?
I think we have, multiple scenarios and like potential in this direction. Obviously, the more we explain what we're doing in the AI area, and like in general in digital solutions, Indian, side could understand like, what things could be learned from us and incorporated in your case. And obviously, since you have also leading positions in different tech, sectors, it's possible, to use the best practices and incorporate in our case. I think I see it's like both sides, potential, for synergies.
Thank you so much, Minister, for talking to NewsX. So there you heard the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs from Lithuania, and he talked about several aspects and how important the AI Impact Summit 2026 is and how is his experience of being first time in India. I'm Arzu Said with video journalist Setu for NewsX in Delhi.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
The war in Ukraine and the US-China tech rivalry, the EU is focusing on technological sovereignty, but the question remains, are European leaders aiming for true independence or just reducing their exposure to geopolitical risks? The EU has launched several initiatives to address these gaps, such as investing billions in semiconductor production and sovereign cloud infrastructure. However, the real challenge lies in whether Europe can realistically build competitive alternatives to US tech giants, or if managed, interdependence is the more practical route. As Europe strengthens its partnerships with India and other democracies, it's clear that the tech landscape is evolving, but can Europe truly achieve digital sovereignty by 2030, or will it still rely on larger global powers? Now we welcome to discuss all this and more. Joining us now is Mr. Martin Hulin. He's a director of the Bertelsmann Stiftung's Digitalization and the Common Good program since October 2023. Mr. Martin leads a team focused on developing innovative approaches to strengthen the common good at both the national and international levels. His areas of expertise include international digital and data policy, AI, and sustainability policy. His work and views have been presented at prestigious venues like the UN World Data Forum and COP conferences, and he was honored with the Future of Data Award in 2023. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Martin Hulin.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Now diving into my first question, Europe currently imports around 80% of its core digital technologies, from advanced semiconductors to cloud infrastructure, and estimates it may need up to 3.6 trillion euros by 2030 to close critical capability gaps. Recent geopolitical shocks, from the war in Ukraine to US-China tech rivalry, have intensified concerns about strategic dependence. When European leaders talk about technological sovereignty, are they aiming for true independence or simply reducing exposure to geopolitical risks?
Thank you for this question. So the reality is 80% of dependency on technological tools is indeed a vulnerability, especially in those areas that you have pointed out, like semiconductors, cloud infrastructure, and AI, where disruptions of, for example, imports could paralyze our economies and also governments. And Europe at this stage is in the middle of a mapping exercise of seeing where these vulnerabilities are, and is fully aware that, of course, there's already an existing huge interdependence. However, the current focus is very much on reducing critical dependencies that pose also geopolitical and security risks for us. And the goal from a geopolitical risk point of view is, of course, that we can act autonomously in crises, even if we remain interconnected with global supply chains. And examples like the recent Greenland crisis, where there was a threat to cut off potentially also digital infrastructure, and of course the ongoing reality of China's control over rare earths, highlight the urgency of such securing of strategic capabilities. And the approach that we are currently following in Europe is very much one of pragmatic sovereignty. We aim to build enough domestic and also capacity of strategic partners to avoid the risk of coercion, to ensure continuity in critical sectors, but this also means that we are now heavily investing in modular and interoperable technologies, such as, for example, the Eurostep proposals that have been around in Europe since last year, rather than replicating an entire ecosystem approach like the one we have been socialized with from Silicon Valley.
Very interesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin, for sharing that. And now, under the EU Chips Act, billions are being invested to raise Europe's share of global semiconductor or production, like you mentioned, including IMEC's 2.5 billion euros next generation chip pilot line in Belgium. Yet advanced chip fabrication remains dominated by East Asia and the United States. Is Europe trying to become a major chip power again, or is the real objective to secure enough domestic capacity to avoid supply shocks in a crisis?
At this stage, it's really rather the latter. I mean, Europe at this stage might be leading on certain semiconductors in niche areas, but it's not a major global chip power. So this is about also crisis-proofing our capacity. And according to the CHIPS Act, our objective is to secure 10 to 20% of global advanced chip production, enough to avoid these shortages.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
India cracks down on sanctions evasion. VC's tankers shake global energy. India blocks illicit oil trade. Shadow fleets thwarted by India's seizure. India, US, Iran geopolitics ignited at sea. Hello, I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching another episode of Explained with me. 3 oil tankers, 1 midnight interception, and a geopolitical ripple stretching from Mumbai to Washington, D.C. and all the way to Iran. On this episode of Explained, we dive into a high-stakes maritime operation that has sent ripples across global energy markets and diplomatic corridors alike. Earlier this month, India intercepted and seized 3 oil tankers operating roughly 100 nautical miles off of the coast of Mumbai. Vessels whose identification numbers reportedly match ships sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control for alleged links to Iran. The vessels Stellar Ruby, Asphalt Star, and Al Jafziya were intercepted by the Indian Coast Guard following what officials described as suspicious activity involving mid-sea operations. The ships were later escorted to Mumbai for further investigation, marking one of India's most visible crackdowns on suspected sanctions evasion in recent years. What makes the seizure particularly significant is the alleged link to U.S. sanctions. Reports indicate that the International Maritime Organization numbers of the 3 ships-matched vessels previously sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control. Under U.S. records, those vessels were listed as Global Peace, Chill 1, and Glory Star 1. The matching IMO numbers suggest these ships may have changed names, a common tactic used by so-called shadow fleet operators to avoid detection. Lately, the concept of a shadow fleet has become central to global sanctions enforcement. These are typically older oil tankers operating through complex ownership structures, often registered in non-restricting jurisdictions. They frequently switch names, flags, and documentations to mask the origin of sanctioned oil. One of the known key tactics involves ship-to-ship transfers in international waters, where oil is transferred from a sanctioned vessel to another tanker, effectively obscuring its origin before it reaches its final destination. This practice makes enforcement difficult and allows sanctioned crude to enter global markets at steep discounts. Shipping data cited in reports suggests that at least 2 of the intercepted vessels had operational links to Iran. Stella Ruby was reportedly flagged in Iran, while Al Jazeera is said to have transported Iranian fuel oil to Djibouti in 2025. Asphalt Star primarily operated along China-linked routes. However, Iranian state media, quoting the National Iranian Oil Company, denied any connection between the seized tankers and the company, stating that neither the ships nor their cargoes were linked to it. Whether directly state-controlled or operated through intermediaries, the broader pattern aligns with how sanctioned oil is often traded globally. Because sanctioned crude carries legal and financial risk, it is typically sold at significant discounts. Intermediaries rely on layered corporate ownership, falsified documents, and mid-sea cargo transfers to reduce traceability. The result is a gray market that continues to function despite
to invest in this. Just to give you a bit of context, this year, the large AI companies are going to spend 20 times more on developing this technology than the US did for the Manhattan Project. Because if you think about seminal moments where the government mobilized to do something, 20 times more just this year alone. So I thought, look, it's vital that we do this in a different way, not like the G7 and G20. We bring industry, innovators, and government together, and that's what we did at Bletchley Park a few years ago. The summit series went to Paris, South Korea, and now brilliantly in India, a country with huge digital ambitions and indeed capacity. But I think over those years, and Alex, will start with this, I think actually the debate on AI has shifted from kind of technology to strategy. From what these tools can do to what governments are choosing to do with them. And I wanted to maybe just start there. Is if you think about the last few years, you are someone who is at the frontier of developing this technology. The journey that we've been on in the last few years, help us understand that. Where have we come? What is it that is exciting at this moment? And just ground us in where we are so that then we can get onto some of these questions about what we do with it.
Yeah, I think, we are sitting here right now at such an incredibly exciting moment for the technology. I think we are at the beginning of, of a true acceleration in the technology. And, in many ways, it's felt like this very clear acceleration even until now. But I think we're going to see sort of 2026 is an inflection point in many ways. I think to contextualize this over the past few years, I think from 2018 through 2024, really, which is a good 6-year period, we were in the era of pre-training. So we were riding one very large exponential curve towards improving the performance of the models. And that curve was very predictable, and it sort of had clear characteristics where the more resources you put in, the more results you would get out. And there was a lot of questions at the time of whether or not this curve would continue large returns. And I think this was sort of one of the more recent sort of eras of AI skepticism. And then in 2024, towards the end of 2024, began the era of reinforcement learning. So this was sort of the next major wave that stacked on top of the previous wave. And this is when we saw the models begin to learn to reason. And there's always this meme of, what did Ilya see? Well, Ilya saw reasoning from the models. And it was very clearly this next mega wave of the technology. And even reinforcement learning had clearly some limitations, and there were all these questions around when that was going to, how long that era was going to last, and maybe there were limitations in that era. And then at the end of 2025, so just a few months ago, I think we've really begun an entirely new paradigm or era of the technology, which is really beginning the era of recursive self-improvement. And I think we're really starting to see this in the development of our models. I think most of the major labs are seeing this in the development of their models, which is that the models themselves have now become instrumental in accelerating the process of producing the next AIs. And so, the sort of, from the outside, what you see is maybe an acceleration of overall development velocity, an acceleration at which the speed at which the new models are being released. Internally, what we see is just dramatic speed-ups. I think the sort of, the productivity of an individual researcher has grown dramatically, and we don't expect that to stop. In fact, we expect it to kind of smoothly continue accelerating, where the output of an individual researcher and individual engineer, well, I think that itself will continue growing exponentially as the technology improves. And the other mega wave that is somewhat coincident with this new paradigm within the sort of development of the technology of recursive self-improvement is really the arrival of agents in earnest. And this is something that has been talked about since, I honestly want to say 2023, with a lot of fanfare. And for a long time, it was sort of one of these hype buzzwords that never actually lived up to the expectations. And I think also at the end of 2025, toward middle to end of 2025, we started to see agents actually work. And this is, these are where the models can actually start taking actions and start automating entire workflows and being sort of dramatically more productive as actual sort of entities unto themselves versus assisters. And this era is, it started with coding agents. We're starting to see it really percolate through personal agents. This is a big part of what we believe in at Meta. And I think over the course of 2026, we will see large-scale agent deployments in many areas of the economy, many areas of the world, and the sort of, the GDP of AI, so to speak, is going to grow exponentially.
Well, that is very welcome to hear. I think you hit on something that is important, because I remember when I first started doing this in the job, the conversations were all around these scaling laws and would they continue? And you mentioned the skepticism. I mean, not only have they continued and continue to deliver this exponential growth, it feels very much like the last few months have seen an acceleration. And it's what you touched on. It's what Dario and Demis have also said to me and publicly, driven by this recursive self-improvement, that the models themselves are now able to help us develop the new models quicker. So, we're at this quite exciting, but also a moment of some anxiety because of that accelerating development timescale. So I wanted to just then talk about trust, because I give you a story. I have two young girls, and as they're using their chatbots and things, and they're always like, please, so-and-so and so-and-so, and thank you when they finish writing their request or they get the answer back. There's lots of pleases and thank yous everywhere. And I thought that was interesting. But I said to them, I said, look, you don't need to do that. There's not a person. It doesn't matter. And by the way, it costs a fortune when we have to do the compute for that. And they said to me, you know what, Daddy? They said, if AI takes over the world, we want to have been kind to the AI. And I thought that was good insurance policy. But it kind of, it touches on this anxiety.
They're very wise.
Yeah, in that maybe. Across the world, we're seeing these different attitudes towards AI. In countries like India, where we are, there's enormous optimism and trust. And then actually in Western countries, we're seeing that anxiety is still the kind of dominant feeling towards AI. Now, I think closing that confidence gap is as much a policy task as it is a technical one. But I'd love to just get your thoughts. I mean, obviously you are at a B2C company dealing with billions of consumers every day. How do you think about this trust question? How do we get trust up in places where it is not, for something that you believe, I believe, and everyone in this room probably believes can do untold good?
Yeah, this is one of the most important questions, and actually perhaps even more so than the technology and the development of the technology, maybe will govern how successfully the technology diffuses, more so than anything. And we think deeply about this because our vision for the technology is that it is we can deploy personal agents that know you better than most people know you, know about your health, know about your goals, know about your relationships, know about your family and your friends, and can really help you live your life more effectively, can help you be healthier, can help you accomplish projects that you never would have had time for, can help you build the business you always wanted, can help you explore your interests. And to properly build that requires an immense amount of trust from consumers, from governments, from effectively everyone, from all organizations. And so, this is one of these interesting moments where I think because the form of the technology that we want it to take is so intimate and is so deeply tied with what we think is really the future of the consumer life, and the consumer is at the core of their relationship with technology. The figuring out ways to develop the technology in partnership with governing bodies and in partnership with nonprofits and other organizations to garner that trust is very important. This is something we've seen at Meta actually with WhatsApp. We were talking about this actually backstage, but WhatsApp has become incredibly ubiquitous and a real, I think, utility for much of the world, in large part due to its commitment to privacy and the sort of trust that we've built around WhatsApp as an organization. Oftentimes at the sort of, not necessarily for the optimization of our business objectives, but for the optimization of trust in WhatsApp as a platform. I think a similar journey will be necessary for the AI products of the modern age, and we've seen, we've already seen various kerfuffles or sort of jabs back and forth between the existing AI products and labs around whether their actions are truly garnering, truly building these levels of trust. But and then I think the topic that you really kicked off at Bletchley around in a sort of like global way around safety, I think.
Hello and welcome, I'm Ellie Richardson and you are watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Iran has not agreed to all the red lines set out by US President Donald Trump for a diplomatic solution, Vice President J.D. Vance said after talks in Geneva. Vance appeared to indicate that the United States will still be interested in diplomacy after Trump threatened force if Iran's clerical state does not agree on key concerns, starting with its nuclear program. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators are resuming a second round of peace talks in Geneva today, as US envoy Steve Witkoff and that talks had brought about meaningful progress in the Washington-led drive to end Europe's biggest war since World War II. A frantic search is underway for 10 backcountry skiers missing in an avalanche in the mountains of California, where a huge storm dumped heavy snow. Officials say a group of 16 people, 4 guides and 12 clients, were caught up in the avalanche. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said ties between India and France are very special after talks with President Emmanuel Macron during his 3-day visit for the AI summit. Armed group Hezbollah rejected the Lebanese government's decision to grant the army at least 4 months to advance to the second phase of a nationwide disarmament plan, saying it would not accept what it sees as a move serving Israel. Millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein suggest the existence of a global criminal enterprise that carried out acts meeting the legal threshold of crimes against humanity, according to a panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council. The Vatican will not participate in US President Donald Trump's Board of Peace initiative. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the Vatican's top diplomatic official, has said, while adding that efforts to handle crisis situations should be managed by the United Nations. Pope Leo, the first US Pope and critic of some of Trump's policies, was invited to join the board in January. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is building an artificial intelligence accountability program as his office probes Elon Musk's XAI over the generation of non-consensual sexually explicit images. Bonta moved quickly last month to send a cease and desist letter to XAI as regulators globally investigated the company. And for your top story this hour, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says that the United States' decision to withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 severely undermined trust in the negotiation process. Speaking at a disarmament conference in Geneva, Araghchi said Tehran has long been ready to address international concerns and insists Iran's nuclear program is exclusively peaceful. He made the comments after a second round of indirect talks with Washington over the long-running dispute. Araghchi said the US exit from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action dealt a major blow to multilateral trust. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has renewed pressure on Tehran, even raising the possibility of regime change. Outside the talks near Geneva, protesters shouted as the Iranian delegation left the venue, with police moving some demonstrators back. At the same time, Iran announced temporary closures in parts of the Strait of Hormuz for military drills, a move that has raised fresh concerns over regional stability and global oil flows. We are now being joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky, who is a professor and Vice Dean for Global Laws for a Global Law School, who's joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today on News X World. Iran's foreign minister says Tehran is prepared to discuss its nuclear program. How significant is this statement in the context of recent indirect talks with the United States?
Well, it's understandable why Iran is eager to cooperate here, exactly because it's in a very difficult position. Through the protests over the last months, the Iranian population will continue to protest, and this government has no other option rather than to cooperate, rather than to escalate any hostilities with its own people, but also with the United States. So that's the only survival point of this government, is to kind of continue to negotiate nuclear deals with the United States, but also with other actors. And for that matter, somehow to distract the otherwise heavy hammers on hits on his head, including internationally, as I said, and also domestically. So it's a survival instinct. They have no other options rather than to cooperate here. The American shipments all around Iran, the military, navy, and all that around Iran is already a signal that Iran has to agree with the elimination of its nuclear military facilities. They can obviously reduce the nuclear reactors to a minimum to produce energy for civilian use. Nobody will disallow them to do that. But the fact that over the years they raised so many suspicions, and correct one, that this is not simply for civilian use, but effectively for military use, From 5%, they went to 60% enrichment of uranium, which already is a clear signal this is a military use, not civilian. So for that matter, yes, Iran is in the corner. They have a lot of pressure domestically and globally. They have to cooperate. And here comes the foreign minister's statement in Geneva that they are willing to continue the negotiations. On the other hand, they try to keep their face and to say it's not end of it, accusing United States, by the way, for breaking the previous deal, which was again, the previous Trump administration effectively made a big mistakes back in 2018. There was a deal signed and implemented by Obama and other countries. It's not only United States, Iran. Many countries at that time were involved in that negotiations and a deal, European Union, China, Israel. But then, yes, that decision of Donald Trump to eliminate everything that Barack Obama did was wrong. That was a mistake. And now we are back in square one trying to negotiate what has been already negotiated back 8 years ago. So yes, but hopefully, yes, this time around, we expect maybe some good news here because Iran, as I mentioned, has no other option, but also United States doesn't like the military option. After Venezuela and the arrest of Maduro, somehow for Donald Trump, it's better to have negotiations and deals. Yes, he's always pretending to be the president of deals, not of military interventions. And for that matter, both for Iran and for United States, negotiations are the preferable tool to continue here.
And to what extent do these loud protests that are going on, do these indicate broader public frustration within Iran about domestic issues, foreign policy, or both?
Absolutely. Iranian people will continue those protests. Nothing has changed there. Human rights situation is horrible in Iran. So many arrested after every protest, and they are in prison. A lot of them were killed, thousands actually, several. We don't know exactly the number, but in a 4-digit numbers of those protesters were killed on the street. And that doesn't go away from the memories of their relatives, but also from all Iranian people all over the world. We have protests in Geneva, and everywhere that the foreign minister will go will face those angry Iranian exiles and all of them. Nothing has changed. The situation doesn't improve. Iran is under sanctions. The economy is in misery in Iran. And that is probably the best signal here that how detrimental was this rule of the Ayatollah since 1979 already, almost 50 years. The situation doesn't go any better. Iran is in isolation. The domestic economy is collapsing. And people are not happy. They are losing jobs. They are losing opportunities. Women have no any gender equality, what happens almost everywhere in the world, by the way. Even Saudi Arabia changed some laws to allow women to go out and to study in university and all of that, but not in Iran. Iran continues to be horribly restrictive to women's rights, and for that matter, yes, protests will come. They should continue until some real changes do happen, not cosmetic, but real changes in Iran. Again, maybe not returning the Shah Pahlavi, because that's another historical disappointment, I must say, by Iranian, but some new democratically elected president without any influence from the Ayatollahs. And for that matter, yes, I think this is the big problem of Iran, is not the nuclear program. It is the total economic mismanagement over decades that made people so angry with the regime, and they will continue to protest until they see some hope, some changes, like in many other countries in the world. See, when those regimes were gone over time, not quickly, but over time, we see changes. In Eastern Europe, that was the same after 50 years of communism. The Eastern European countries got democratically elected leadership, and they are much better now. Some of the even Middle East countries, like Tunisia, also even Iraq, removing Saddam Hussein of Iraq over time. Again, I'm not saying that was the right model of doing things with invasion by United States. That is totally illegal in international law. But the Iraqi people over time got some sort of economic opportunities today, which was impossible under Saddam Hussein regime.
Thank you, Professor Popovsky, but please don't go too far as we will be coming back to you very shortly. Russian Foreign Ministry has said that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will be holding talks with his Cuban counterparts in Moscow. Russia has called the US blockade against Cuba as illegitimate. Meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakhodova has said that Moscow will be continuing to provide support to Cuba. We are now being rejoined by Professor Popovsky. Thank you for rejoining us back here on NewsX World. In what ways could discussions between Russia and Cuba influence their responses to external pressure, such as US sanctions and diplomatic isolation?
Yes, you're right, Ailey. There is not much here to expect. They lost Venezuela already. Cuba is really in trouble because they cannot receive any oil anymore from Venezuela. But it also shows how desperate are those few remaining friends of Russia around the world. Nobody else will go to Moscow apart from the Cuban foreign minister because Cuba is in such a misery and trouble. They have no other friends left. And Russia has no more friends apart from North Korea, Belarus, Cuba. That's it. Only those countries can meet Putin and Lavrov. There is no more anybody else disillusioned anymore to cooperate with. Yes, they will ask for money, of course. Cubans have no other friend in the world. They have to ask some, but Russia doesn't have money anymore. That's the horrible news for the Cubans, because Russia itself spends millions in a useless war for 4 years in Ukraine. Russia has no money to help Syria. They didn't help Syria when the regime change happened. They couldn't help Maduro and Venezuela. And where Russia will find money for Cuba, I have no idea, with the collapsing Russian economy already for several months. So the only message here is that if you don't really change your foreign policy and if you don't become a really international player, if you don't have democratically elected leaders, that's the end story of all those. We mentioned Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi in the past. Everybody who wants to held power forever and become an isolated pariah in the world, that's what they face. Cubans should make their choices, especially after seeing Maduro, their only friend in Latin America, gone. Well, what is next for Cuba? Yes, they have to think about how Russia will help. I don't know. I don't think Russia can help anybody. Russia couldn't help Armenia, which is the neighboring country. Armenians, which are historically close to Russia and had all the help and assistance from Putin, they already talked to Americans and Chinese. So yes, that's one direction, one end for those who don't understand what the world today is about. There are these ideological preferences to Russia and these anti-Western rhetorics, anti-colonial and anti-imperial rhetoric, but that doesn't help. So yes, Cuba is under sanctions and Russia is under sanctions, obviously, for the invasion in Ukraine. And nothing good can happen of that meeting. They will promise each other, exactly like Russia promised Maduro a lot of military support, by the way. There was a military contract between Venezuela and Russia. And what happened? For 45 minutes, I think, the Americans took Maduro out of Venezuela. That is what's going to happen for everybody who expects any support from Russia in the future. Look at Maduro, who expected Russians to help him. Where is he now? The same for Cubans and for everybody else who hope still Russia will help us.
Thank you so much, Professor Popovsky, for joining us here today on NewsX World. It was a pleasure speaking with you. NVIDIA announced a multi-year deal with Meta Platforms to sell millions of its AI chips, including both current and future models. The deal covers NVIDIA's Blackwell chips as well as the forthcoming Rubin AI chips, along with standalone installations of its Grace and Vera central processors. These processors, based on ARM technology, are designed to power emerging fields like AI agents, but also handle traditional tech tasks like running database. These moves come as Meta is also developing its own AI chips and in talks with Google about using its Tensor Processing Units, or T-Plus. NVIDIA says its Grace processors have already demonstrated half the power consumption of other chips for database tasks, with expected improvements coming with the next generation. India and France have agreed to elevate their relationship to a special global strategic partnership, marking a major step in bilateral ties. The announcement came during the official visit of French President Emmanuel Macron to India at the invitation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The two leaders held talks in Mumbai and jointly inaugurated the 2026 India-France Year of Innovation. Both sides said the upgraded partnership will guide cooperation in defence, nuclear energy, space, artificial intelligence, trade, climate action and people-to-people exchanges under the Horizon 2047 roadmap. France reiterated strong support for India's permanent membership of a reformed United Nations Security Council, where both leaders called for an effective multilateralism and rules-based international order. President Macron also invited Prime Minister Modi to the 2026 G7 summit in France, underscoring India's growing role in global economic and security discussions. We are now being joined by Ambassador Ashok Sajaha, who is a former Indian diplomat joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. What are the key elements of this new special global strategic partnership between India and France, and why have both leaders emphasized it as crucial in an uncertain world?
Yes, thank you very much for having me on your show. This is a very special occasion. I think we need to remember that France was the first Western nation in 1998 that India signed a strategic partnership. We celebrated the 25th anniversary, the silver jubilee of that in 2023. And that is when the Horizon 2047 program was launched. But the fact that we are upgrading it, elevating it to the level of special global strategic partnership, I think it is significant because it is the context in which this action has been taken. There is great uncertainty in the world. There is lack of credibility, lack of reliability, and predictability has become a very important and a very rare commodity as far as global affairs are concerned. So in that context, when two countries look upon each other as credible partners, as predictable partners, as trustworthy partners, then that is something very important. And in that context, I think this strategic global partnership will promote certainty, will promote credibility, and will promote stability and prosperity in the world. So it is in that context that this decision has been taken. And of course, the relationship is very broad-based, it is very deep, it is further sought to be enhanced by getting more elements of technology, of artificial intelligence, of green energy in this partnership. Of innovation, the Year of Innovation has been launched. Both India and France are innovation partners of each other. So there is a great trust factor between the two countries, which is a commodity that is at high premium these days.
Thank you, Ambassador Ashok, but please don't go anywhere as we will be back with you very shortly. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been engaged in a series of high-level bilateral meetings at the India AI Impact Summit 2026, taking place at the Bharat Mandapam, New Delhi, from February the 16th to the 20th. These discussions focus on strengthening global ties in AI, digital innovation and strategic partnerships. PM Modi met with French President Emmanuel Macron to inaugurate the India-France Year of Innovation 2026, highlighting AI demonstration. He also held talks with Finnish PM Petteri Orpo discussing AI research and digital cooperation. Indian PM Modi and Spanish President Pedro Sanchez focused on trade, digital innovation and climate action. Further, PM Modi met with Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić and Croatian PM Andrej Plenković to deepen trade and investment ties. With over 110 countries and 30 international organizations participating, the summit is pivotal in shaping global AI policies and collaborations. We are now being rejoined by Ambassador Ashok. Thank you for joining us back here on News X World. How important is AI cooperation becoming in India's foreign policy and global strategy?
Yeah, it is very significant. It's very important because we see that there is a dominance of two major players, that is the United States and China. As far as AI is concerned, the progress in AI, as far as the large language models are concerned, they are concentrated basically in these two geographies. So I think the fact that there is not dependence of other countries of the world on these two powers, there is no AI imperialism or AI dominance of these two countries. The other countries have to cooperate, they have to collaborate, they have to come together and also try to develop the same technologies. So India and France are collaborating in this. We want inclusive artificial intelligence. All the benefits should be given to the other countries. Also, it should not be misused as far as misinformation, disinformation, fake news is concerned. We would like that to be taken care of. So in that context, the collaboration between two powers like India and France is very useful. We have recently also seen the signing of an India-EU FTA, very ambitious agreement. So we would like to collaborate. India is investing very significantly in this particular sector, and we would like to collaborate with other partners like the European Union, France being one component of it, Japan, South Korea, and or the other major players in developing artificial intelligence that can be made available to everyone, that there is no divide between different countries, between different segments of society. So in that context, it is very significant that both countries are collaborating in this sector.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Shook, for joining us here today on NewsX World.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to be with you. Thank you.
Now our correspondent Thomas Porteous, who is intensively covering the AI Impact Summit at the Bharat Mandapam, has spoken to the Global Education and Adolescent Development Director at UNICEF, Pia Rebello Barritio. Let's cut across.
Hello, you are watching NewsX World. We are here at the Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi for the AI Impact Summit here in the Indian capital. Joining us now to discuss her session on AI in education is Pia Rebello Barritio. She's the Global Director for Education and Adolescent Development at UNICEF. Thank you very much, Pia, for joining us here on NewsX World.
My pleasure to be here and great to chat with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Many countries, of course, are adopting AI in their learning. What more can you tell us about artificial intelligence in classrooms, especially in developing nations like India? This, of course, is, after all, the first AI summit in the Global South. What does that mean?
It's a very exciting time for the world of education because we are in what's been called a global learning crisis. And there have been many system failures that are either leaving children behind or depriving them of learning opportunities. So we're at a very interesting, pivotal moment in history where, with cautious optimism, we think that this profound tool could present solutions. So, for example, one of the biggest challenges facing the world is the number of children out of school. And you would think 2026, we have kids out of school. Yes. 272 million children are out of school right now. Their learning is being denied. So we need solutions to make that possible. And what we're seeing, for example, in the state of Gujarat, is they are using large data models and systems to be able to forecast and predict the risk of children who are going to drop out. So it's not kids drop out and you go in with the intervention and bring them back. It's a prevention model, that you are already anticipating or forecasting who are at risk of dropping out. And right now, the models are pretty good. They're over 73% accurate. So they're able to already predict that and get kids back to school. So there are many such tools and solutions we're excited about. But having said that, if they are not delivered and deployed with equity, we are at risk of creating a bigger divide. And this is really critical. We have to have equity. We have to be able to have children safe. They have to be human-centered. And the solutions have to be shaped for the global South. If we put these 4 principles in, we are on a road to potentially bringing a lot of exciting solutions that could transform education.
Indeed. It's fascinating. And millions of children, of course, are still struggling with the lack of education all around the world, as you said, over nearly 300 million children. Are we expecting too much from this technology, or can it solve all those problems?
Technology itself cannot. So let's be clear on that. We've had EdTech at scale for 2 decades. And what has it changed for learning? And I always use the phrase and say notmuch.com, because it hasn't changed that much. So if we do want this tool to actually change learning, pedagogy has to influence technology. That's the shift that has to occur, not technology trying to shape an education system. And this is the age at which, as these products are being developed, as the engineers are thinking about what's the next big thing we can do, we've got to bring in the school system. We've got to bring in the learning science. How does the brain learn? We've got to bring in that to influence learning. And that's where we're going to see the change. And I talked about equity earlier. Again, equity comes in. The language models are based on about 10% of languages from the world. So how do we actually get to 90% of the kids? Again, we've got to shape it in an equitable manner. So it is distributed in a way that it lands with relevance and context. So there's a lot of hope, but it can't be led just by the tech side. Devices and technology don't equal equity. It's when you bring in the human-centeredness, you bring in the teaching, learning environment, you bring in what we know from the learning science, that's when we're going to see the change.
And teenagers all around the world are using AI. Are we moving too fast without them fully understanding? Are we losing the classroom in a traditional sense?
You know, this is such a conundrum, no? Because tech is just moving at its pace. It's not waiting for anyone. But if we sit on the sidelines and wait, maybe we just miss the train completely. So it's finding that balance of being on that train or that plane, but also understanding how to be responsible about it. And I think that's where school systems and education systems are going. How do we use these tools? How do we bring in the responsibility, the child safeguards? And that's what the systems have to do. The systems have to do the safeguards so that it can be used responsibly. But I don't think time is an option. I don't think that either the way we are doing it or the way technology is working, it's not working on the time continuum that we are used to. It's got its own speed of going. And I think we have to embrace it with the cautious optimism and the responsibility that goes with anything new.
And Pierre, of course, we're on day 2 out of 5 in this summit. If this went perfectly, what would we want to come out of it?
That children are at the heart of any conversation on AI going forward.
Pierre, thank you so much for joining us here on News 6 World. It's a great pleasure to have you on the program.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, there we have it. That is all that's time for our interview. Pleasure to talk to Pierre here on News 6 World. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas, for giving us that insight. That's all we have time for this hour. Keep watching News X World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching the World Report on News X World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of this hour. Shares facilitated and oil prices dropped back down as Tehran gives an encouraging response during talks with US officials in Geneva on Iran's nuclear program, after days of escalating tension from President Donald Trump. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said a new window of opportunity has opened. Negotiators from Ukraine and Russia concluded the first day of the US-mediated peace talks in Geneva, with the US President Donald Trump pressing Kyiv to act fast to reach a deal to end the 4-year conflict. A frantic search is underway for 10 backcountry skiers missing in an avalanche in the mountains of California, where a huge storm dumped heavy snow. Officials say a group of 16 people, 4 guides and 12 clients were caught up in the avalanche. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said ties between India and France are very special after talks with President Emmanuel Macron during his 3-day visit for the AI summit. Armed group Hezbollah rejected the Lebanese government's decision to grant the army at least 4 months to advance the second phase of a nationwide disarmament plan, saying it would not accept what it sees as a move serving Israel. Millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein suggest the existence of a global criminal enterprise that carried out acts meeting the legal threshold of crimes against humanity, according to a panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council. DNA from a glove found near Nancy Guthrie's Arizona home failed to score a match in a national database of genetic profiles. The outcome, announced by the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI, marked a major setback for investigators as the search for the 84-year-old mother stretched into its 17th day. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is building an artificial intelligence accountability program as his first office probes Elon Musk's XAI over the generation of non-consensual sexually explicit images. Bonta moved quickly last month to send a cease and desist letter to XAI as regulators globally investigated the company. And for your top story this hour, US military officials say American forces killed 11 people after striking 3 alleged drug smuggling boats in the Caribbean Sea and the Eastern Pacific, marking one of the deadliest days so far in the Trump administration's maritime campaign. The strikes carried out by US Southern Command bring the total number of deaths from similar operations to at least 145 since September, when US President Donald Trump ordered action against people labeled as narco-terrorists. The military says intelligence confirmed the boats were operating along known drug trafficking routes, adding that no US forces were hurt. However, rights groups, including the Washington Office on Latin America, have questioned the legality of the strikes, warning they could amount to the extrajudicial killings without due process. The operations come amid heightened US military activity in Latin America waters and continue to draw sharp international security. We are now being joined by retired Major General Sudhakar Ji, who's a senior geopolitical and strategic defence expert, joining us from Jaipur. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. So the US military says it targeted 3 boats it believed were involved in the drug trafficking route, killing 11 people. How do we assess the evidence and intelligence used to justify these lethal strikes?
Good morning, Ellie. Thank you for inviting me for your show. Simply, there is no way to justify. It's highly illegal. It doesn't have any evidence. Even if they have some presumptions, do you kill people based on the presumptions? That is where the international rule of law comes into question. So I'm afraid I also would join NewsX World channel to call it out that this mindless killing of people without any evidence based on the premise that they are terrorists. Were they armed? Have they fired at any innocent civilians? Have they perpetrated any kind of crime except for the presumption that they are drug traffickers? Drug traffickers also is based on some intelligence which the American agencies have harnessed or they have accumulated or collated from the environment, which is not known to the open society and open sources. Therefore, there is a big question. Back to Eli.
The strikes are part of a broader campaign against alleged narco-terrorists, but critics argue this raises serious legal and ethical questions. Should the US be using military force in this way in international waters?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't know, but because day before yesterday, I suppose the Secretary of State Marco Rubio addressed a very high dignitaries in Munich in the conference. He spoke about neo-imperialism. Is this what the world drifting into in 21st century? That is, and is this world supposed to be supported by such kind of killing of innocent people without any evidence, just purely based on imagination or the inputs which they have, the world doesn't know? So in my opinion, it is highly incorrect, and the rule of law as relevant and applicable in the world order today, despite the geopolitical churn and unpredictability and uncertainty, and I still feel that some agency in the world, the entire world, has to get together collectively. They have to raise the question, because this cannot go on. And if you allow me further, to me it appears that this is a kind of a method to distract the domestic pressures which are building up on Donald Trump. One is towards Iran, the second one is here, third one is not moving any further, making any headway towards Ukraine. These are the promises, the two of them that he promised to bring an end to the mindless conflict was the Ukraine war and the conflict in the Middle East. Nothing is happening. No substantive kind of progress has been made. So to open up a new front is mere a question of, I would say, distracting the domestic constituency so that the survival of the political authority continues without any questions of accountability. The last point I have is, well, the superpower has done many such kind of, killing of people in numerous campaigns, whether it is Vietnam or Afghanistan or Syria or Libya. So then does the world close its eyes to such kind of killing of innocent people without any sufficient evidence? When are we going to raise voice against injustice being meted out in 21st century? Is this the new imperialism that one is talking of and aiming for? Certainly the answer is no. And therefore, does it mean that the whole world order is to accept this new normal as a way of life? Again, the answer is no. Then what is it that logically one should be doing? One should be collectively calling it out and voice a concern and bring this mindless killing of people in the Caribbean Sea to an end, or hold United States accountable in the apex organization of United Nations Security Council or in the General Assembly or in some form. And media also has to play a very important role. I am afraid the Western media is not taking serious cognizance of the entire issue. Back to you, Ellie.
And with at least 145 lives lost in similar operations since late 2025, how should international law and human rights considerations shape responses to transnational crime like drug smuggling, especially when this level of military action causes civilian casualties?
United States is the primary agency which went on to create, after the collapse of League of Nations, an organization called as United Nations General Assembly and the Security Council. And along with that, at different timelines, multiple global organizations came into existence. And the last one, if I respect my memory, was the World Trade Organization, 1997 or so, close to that timeline. Now, amongst all these, the International Court of Justice also came into existence. Without superpower support and initiative, this couldn't have come into existence. The Human Rights Organization. What are these organizations doing? Aren't they actually seized with such situation? They are the ones who have to hold the USA accountable. And towards that end, the media also has to play a very important role. With regard to the brilliant question which you have asked, how do you pinpoint? Well, what more do you expect or want to pinpoint not an allegation of serious offense against the humanity? Here people moving in one or two or three boats, they straight away they are being engaged with precision guided lethal weapon systems. They're being destroyed. There is no chance to afford them any kind of opportunity to defend themselves. The rule of law always provides an opportunity for the accused to defend himself. You have not given a chance to these people. You have based your military actions based on presumptions of drug trafficking, and mindful of the fact that Venezuela, as on today, going by the latest articulations in the United Nations concerning agency, is not one of those circuits which provides drugs. Drugs are being provided through Colombia, through Mexico, into USA. I'm talking about fentanyl. What is coming from Venezuela, maybe at a pinch, maybe the cocaine, 250, I'm told, tons of cocaine has been supplied in previous year, and the value of it, 1 ton, is around 25 billion. If that is true, and if it is supported by evidence, well, that could possibly become one of the reasons. And Maduro has been picked up middle of the night. He's been hijacked along with his wife. This is a very serious criminal offense that we can expect in the rule of law. So all this put together, it is very difficult to actually come to a solution as of now, because it's a serious subject. It is mounting by the day and going on into extreme situations. This must be brought to an end. First, we must adopt a solution spectrum. The solution spectrum should be contain, counter, and contest. Containment would have firstly stopped wherever it is no further engagement of such kind of movement of boats without sufficient proof. That is how we contain it. We stop United States from engaging militarily, one. And how do you counter it? To counter it, it is a medium-term kind of an option. You must have media, you must have global agencies coming together, you must have the leading economies, you must have the global south coming together and speaking in one voice. And last but not the least, there is the International Court of Justice which must actually play its role. Back to Yeli.
Thank you so much, Sadaqji, but don't go too far, as we will be coming back to you very soon. US Energy Secretary Chris Wright says the world needs to concentrate on its current energy needs, as net zero was never going to happen, and that all the current climate policies aren't doing anything to move the needle on climate change. He also stated that the climate cult has weakened Europe, driven up energy prices and moved jobs to Asia. He has added that it has reduced economic opportunities for Europeans, made it harder to pay their bills, and has made them very dependent on Russia. Let's in fact listen in to what the US Energy Secretary had to say.
The Paris net zero thing, like net zero is never, 2050, that's never going to happen. It never was going to happen. But it's been a program to grow the role of the government, to make energy more expensive, and send the industry out of Europe over to Asia. That's a crazy policy. Yeah. So globally, over the last century, we've increased atmospheric CO2 concentration by about 50%. That's been sort of a side effect of the modern world. We're radically wealthier. We live longer. We have dramatically more opportunities. And the world is getting a little bit warmer. CO2 emissions contribute. Energy makes people's lives better. And sort of the experiment the last 17 years, I think rightfully called the climate cult, has just driven up the price of energy. Europe as a whole produces less energy today than it did 17 years ago, and prices are dramatically higher. It's just moved jobs overseas to Asia. It's reduced economic opportunities for Europeans. It's made it harder to pay their bills. It made them very dependent on Russia. We want a strong, powerful, industrial, wealthy, prosperous Europe.
A panel of independent experts appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council has stated that millions of files related to the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein suggest the existence of a global criminal enterprise that carried out acts meeting the legal threshold of crimes against humanity. According to the panel, crimes outlined in documents released by the US Justice Department were committed against a backdrop of supremacist beliefs, racism, corruption, and extreme misogyny. The experts said the allegations contained in the files require an independent, thorough and impartial investigation, and said inquiries should also be launched into how it was possible for such crimes to be committed and for so long. We are now being joined by Shruti Dasgupta, who's an international affairs analyst, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. The UN-appointed panel said the evidence in the Epstein files suggests a global criminal enterprise. Whose actions could meet the legal definitions of crimes against humanity? What criteria do experts use to reach that determination? And how might this shape international understanding of this case?
Well, there's no standard definition that could fit directly in this case, because crimes against humanity generally encase mass murder or starvation, which generally leads into loss of millions of life or deterioration of a particular segment of people, ethnicity of people. So, of course, mostly which come under the watch of genocide. So, technically speaking, it would not really truly qualify as crimes against humanity, but if you're only looking at the files, which is the 3 million documents that which have 2,000 videos and 180,000 odd emails and pictures, you would realize that although there is a limited number of victims, there are about 1,200 victims that got doxed with the way that these particular tranches were released. The redactions were imperfect. The information only protected the people who actually perpetrated those crimes rather than the victims. But if you look at the fallout, who were meeting with them? Economists, businessmen, academia, technocrats, politicians. So basically, every kind of powermonger, knowledge broker that could ever be in existence was meeting, greeting, and dealing with Epstein and his cohorts. So what I find might be a small number of women, but the fallout of their actions affected all of humanity, because it was not restricted to one particular island or even USA. He was meeting with people all over Europe, in Asia, in Africa, everybody. With the only exceptions that I have found there to be at least 300 names. I believe the list has been released by US government, where they've named people who were too frequently either meeting with him or writing with him and dealing with Epstein. So the only people I don't find there is probably the North Korean dictators or the Chinese CCP. Apart from them, I think everybody has some way or the other been featured either as a resource to be exploited or engaged with, or as a person who wanted to exploit resources and have access to the particular supply chains that Epstein had put out. These would affect all of humanity. That means most nations had policymakers, had businessmen dealing with a man who is a known sex offender, who allegedly died by suicide, but right now it looks more like silenced to me at my end. So this is what shows that it could be a crime against humanity, though not directly claiming lives of a large number of human beings, but directly affecting the way the lives of millions and billions of people were run, just because the policymakers were corrupt or had proclivities that led to really deviant tastes which were entertained by Epstein.
And the panel recommended an independent, thorough and impartial investigation into how such atrocities could have continued for such a long time. What legal and diplomatic challenges would such an investigation face? And do you think this would be a bit of a relief for the victims who were let down, like you said, in these files when they were, their names weren't redacted, but other big, powerful names were?
Well, look at the timeline. This has been operating, these were news more than 20 years ago. This was happening more than 20 years ago. Although justice should be delivered to every single victim, we have a saying that if justice is delayed by so long, it is actually justice has been denied to the victim. So even though the UN would probably constitute a special segment where they'll take in neutral parties from all nations who will go through all the filth in the unredacted format that is available with the US government and find the people who have been dealing in these power broking corridors and make them pay for misusing power to such an extent that they actually went this dark path. But that would take time again. That means that already justice that has been for 20 years in waiting has to wait another couple of years more. By the time, how many of those victims would actually want to go and revisit that part of their lives, go back for their statements all over again? And the US government has decided not to pursue any particular actions on the released files. They have declared that there will be no new cases filed under the name of Epstein's, under the banner of Epstein files. So that shows that the US government is not entertaining any new legal actions just because the tranches have been released. The other governments, of course, are taking a stand. At least people are being dismissed from their posts. There are investigations being launched. So these are the diplomatic actions that we can expect. If you are named and there is credible evidence that you were dealing with Epstein and his groups to ensure that policies favored you and your nation, then you should answer for it. And if you were actually present on that island and enjoying those really depraved acts, then there should be a criminal investigation into you. So these are things that at least European nations have seen that are trying to enact. US, of course, is not. And that is in itself a big question whether the true perpetrators would ever actually face justice system in the USA or abroad. So what I find is that UN can make the noises, ensure that they stand with the victim, but the actual authority to act on the people who really truly were doing it are actually sitting in the power corridors of USA today, namely Trump, Melania, and Lutnick and others. So there were people who are still in power who dealt with Epstein and are shameless about it.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for joining us here today and giving your insights on News X World. French President Emmanuel Macron and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Tuesday unveiled India's first H-125 helicopter assembly line, marking a major step in defence and aerospace cooperation between the two countries. The facility has been set up under a joint venture between Airbus and Tata Advanced Systems and is part of a new agreement aimed at expanding manufacturing under India's Make in India push. India and France also agreed to jointly manufacture Hammer Precision guided missiles in India, further deepening strategic defence ties. Macron, who is on a 3-day visit to India, held bilateral talks with Modi in Mumbai, where both leaders emphasised technology transfer, industrial collaboration and long-term partnership. Officials say the deals reflect growing trust between New Delhi and Paris and position India as a key hub for global defence and aerospace manufacturing. UN spokesperson Stephanie Dujarric has warned that nearly 3 years into Sudan's war, the region is facing an unprecedented displacement crisis, with humanitarian needs far overstripping available sources. Dujarric has said that the conflict has involved almost daily drone attacks on civilians, forcing millions to flee their homes across Sudan and into neighbouring countries. Let's listen in.
فتح الطريق لكادوغلي ومبروك لأهلنا في كادوغلي أنه وصول القوات المسلحة إليه. القوات المسلحة ستصل إلى أي مكان في السودان.
Nearly 3 years into the devastating war in Sudan, including almost daily drone attacks on civilians, the region faces an unprecedented displacement crisis with humanitarian needs outpacing available resources. To meet these growing needs, the UN Refugee Agency and 123 of our partners are urgently seeking $1.6 billion to provide food, shelter, healthcare protection, and dignified support for 5.9 million people across 7 countries neighboring Sudan by year's end. The plan also promotes longer-term solutions, such as helping governments, including refugees in national systems, and expand access to services. Host governments and local communities continue to demonstrate remarkable solidarity. However, their capacity is being pushed to the brink, underscoring the need for a consecutive 4th annual appeal on this scale. We continue to call for stronger international backing to address the persistent underfunding of humanitarian operations in the countries hosting people fleeing Sudan, and we await a lasting peace. And we reiterate once again, especially in light of the continuing attacks on civilians, for the parties to respect international law and to never target civilians, health infrastructure, religious sites.
Meanwhile, Sudanese Army's chief has also responded. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
فتح الطريق لكادوغلي ومبروك لأهلنا في كادوغلي.
Emerging businesses like Waymo or isomorphic labs, I think they're all getting better and growing based on this one technology underneath. So we can generate a return there. Just as an example, cloud alone in the last year, the backlog has doubled year on year to $240 billion. So that shows the potential for return on the other side. And so we are investing to meet that demand, and that's what makes this an exciting moment. So I think the investment makes sense given the progress in the technology we are seeing and the opportunities we see on top of it.
Demis, I have to ask you the third elephant in the room, which is, what on earth is AGI? Because, we keep hearing about it, and the more we hear about it, the more we feel like we're trying to build something that is going to control all of us. And then the question is, why are we building it? So what is it? Is it really the end goal to control? Is the end goal to augment prosperity? And help us understand your take on it. And also, how should India be thinking about AGI? Or if we need to prepare, what should we be doing?
Well, the first thing I'll say is that the reason I've worked my whole career on AI is because I think it could be the ultimate tool for accelerating scientific discovery and areas like medicine. So things like AlphaFold, I hope, will be the first of many advances showcasing that. And then we can apply that to help us tackle many of the challenges facing society today, from disease to climate to inequality. So I think AI on the upside, the opportunity has an AGI, and the limit has that potential. In terms of defining what AGI is, I've always defined it, have a high bar for AGI, which is a system that exhibits all the cognitive capabilities that humans have. Now, the reason that's important is the human reference point is because the brain is the only evidence we have, the only existence proof we have that general intelligence is possible. So it's kind of, we won't really know we have a fully general system unless it's able to do a lot of things that we sometimes take for granted. Things like creativity and long-term planning and better use of memory. And so today's systems, they're impressive, but they're not there yet, in my opinion. And I think we've still got a way to go, at least another 5-10 years to go. But certainly in the next phase, the next decade or 2 decades, I see it as the sort of ultimate enhancement tool for us and human scientists, human experts, but also the youth of today. And this is what was exciting, seeing that in India here in this visit, is we'll have access to these incredible tools. So whatever that means, building businesses, creating art, I think they'll be sort of almost superpowered to do that with these access to these tools that you can access from anywhere, the most cutting-edge tools in the world from anywhere, including from India. So I think it's going to be a very exciting moment, but there are also risks too that we have to take into account. You mentioned jobs earlier, but there's also technical risks of making sure these systems stay within their guardrails and they serve our purposes and what we want as humanity. And then furthermore, the economic question of sharing the benefits that that's going to bring widely and equally to across the world. So these are all big challenges still to come. But the potential's there if we do it in the right way.
Just listening to what you said, something just struck me, which is we all talk about how AI in the world of AI, we are going to question the role of humans, and we don't know. But what you said sort of told me is that the role of humans is going to become even more important. Am I right in reading that?
I think for the next couple of decades, I think that's going to be the way. If you think about the AI systems today, they're kind of passive systems. They're impressive, but the human using it puts in the energy, puts in the question. Even in science, we have to supply the hypothesis and what the right research question is, and then these tools will help us get to those answers more quickly. So I think that's going to be the next phase of the AI development story.
James, I'll come back to you. Sundar talked about his vision of success is when the last person in the value chain is empowered. Now in India, we have a very strong SME sector, the small, micro businesses. They're really the backbone of our economy, right? And they always are left behind when it comes to technology adoption. I'll ask you the same question. What should AI success look like, but with the SME lens? So what would your answer be?
I actually think this is one of the most exciting opportunities because I think for the longest time, most SMEs in both developed, quite frankly, any economy, have always not had the kind of capabilities and powers that large companies have. And I think this is probably the first technology that fundamentally changes that. And you could argue the internet and mobile and all of that did some of that, but this does this even more. Think about the kinds of superpowers that this technology gives to an SME. Imagine an SME, it could be a trader, it could be a retailer, it could be a small manufacturer doing kind of handcrafts and so forth. But think about the ability to be able to harness technology without having to be a technologist. Think about the small proprietor who can actually describe the technological systems that they want their small business to use and almost vibe code or describe what they want, and these systems build that. So I think the possibility for these kind of superpower capabilities being available to small businesses, I think it's going to be extraordinarily exciting. And I think the potential for that, particularly for countries like India and countries in the global south, where the SME part of the economy is actually the biggest part of the economy and touches more people, more lives. Now, one of the things that, we're hoping we can contribute to this, and we're partnering right now with the Project Vani, for example, with the Indian Institute of Science, which is how do you make these technologies more available?
All right, viewers, that was Alphabet and Google CEO Sundar Pichai speaking in the panel at the India AI Summit. But let's move on to give you some more details that are coming in from the AI Summit. The India AI Impact 2026 Summit in New Delhi has been extended by an extra day until February 21 as overwhelming global interest and massive turnout pushed organizers to prolong access. Longer daily hours have also been announced to accommodate visitors, startups and industry leaders eager to explore the latest in artificial intelligence. Day 3 of the summit has been marked by statements from Demis Hassabis, CEO of Google DeepMind, and Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw, who highlighted India's role in shaping the global future of artificial intelligence. Further engagements at the summit include Prime Minister Narendra Modi meeting the President of Estonia, Alar Karis, at Hyderabad House to discuss strengthening bilateral ties. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Olzas Bektunov of Kazakhstan arrived in New Delhi and was welcomed by Union Minister Kirti Vardhan Singh. His participation at the summit is expected to boost technology and innovation partnerships between India and Kazakhstan. Prime Minister Modi also met the President of Serbia, Alexander Vučić, at Hyderabad House, reaffirming India's strategic and technology partnerships across Europe and Asia. Regardless of the challenges, the summit continues to showcase India as a global leader in artificial intelligence, with participation from world leaders, tech giants, startups, and policymakers. We will now cut across to French President Emmanuel Macron as he attends the India-French Cooperation Summit.
Here today, but all around the city, about how AI is a technology that basically we only get probably once a century. That changes everything, from the way we learn, from the way we get informed, from the way we cure disease. We're in one of the most prestigious hospitals here. It changes the way we interact. It changes the way we access information. And as such, it can only be dealt when we bring a lot of different stakeholders in one room. And that's what we're doing with the AI summit we did in Paris and that India is doing now. When you're thinking about AI and you both work in AI, and I know you have this idea in mind on where you want to bring AI, and this is something we concretely share with our Indian friends. This is too much of an important technology to just be developed in the hands of a few companies. We need to think how we develop it with public good interest. And I know you both care about this topic very much. So maybe starting with Manan, based on your work, what would be your advice to this room, scientists here, but also people from the government, people from all around the world who are gathered in Delhi, so make sure that we continue trying and pushing AI in the interest of public good, which was a key theme of our AI Paris Summit as well.
Sure. So, we can just talk endlessly about AI, but I'll focus more on, something which is relevant for this discourse. So we have to see that as AI matures, as it becomes more and more useful, it will be adopted more. It will be consumed more. And if it is being consumed more and we are really serious about its social good, then it has to become more sustainable. It has to become more energy efficient. It has to become more green. So that is something that, at least in our work, we try to closely focus on, because we work on things like next forms of computing, semiconductor devices which take less energy. So, neuromorphic computing, bio-inspired computing. The essence here is that we need to cut down the power budget or the energy budget that AI systems consume. And I think, at least in the Indo-French context, this has a lot of relevance because both countries have strong commitment to AI for the wider good and also for sustainability. And, with our French partners, we are working extensively on building low energy AI systems. The work is quite complementary, just how the cultures are complementary. They work more on new materials. We work more on building systems with those materials or algorithms with those materials which are more energy efficient. So if you ask me to summarize, I would say that sustainable AI or getting the AI systems to be more green, more sustainable is what would make it enduring and what it would take to much larger scale of impact.
And what we can do together.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Priyanka, do you want to add up to that topic as well?
Yes, thank you for the question. And just to add to Manan, so AI for good, because AI, let's be honest, it's machine learning and among other forms of training data. And at the base, it's very, very technical. So it might actually scare people. So we need some mechanisms that, on one side, you're able to destigmatize this fear of technology and people not knowing what is behind. Even for us scientists, sometimes we're like, okay, what's behind this model? And so on the sustainability aspect, it's also, we are training large amounts of data, but is it better to focus on certain aspects, and that really depends on regulatory access, to the different data sets that we have. For example, we work on flood early warning systems, and I'm heading international strategy for this company. And so when we are doing transboundary training, how do we get access to that data? Even if we cross-collaborate with research teams, so we require the help of policymakers to make sure that the access to that data is fluid, so that we have more parameters that can help us with our training.
Thank you. Manan, you're also a professor, and so one of the aspects I know you're thinking about a lot is the impact of AI on your students. Could you build a bit on that as well?
Yeah. So again, especially for academic pedagogy, it's like an inflection point with the LLMs, the GPTs, the agentic systems. It's like a never seen before situation, and many things are not clear. We don't want to jump question paper with an agentic AI, or whether you can replace the classroom teacher with an avatar of a instructor. So there are many gray areas, but we need to ride this tide, and we need to really be able to tame. Both students and the teachers need to tame this technology for the wider good. So.
Thank you. So you talked about sustainability, data access that led us to teaching, and you mentioned it, kids. In the session before with Minister Le Henaf, we had a great discussion.
And now moving on, viewers, the Kremlin has reportedly denied that Russia or China carried out any secret nuclear talks, noting that Beijing has also rejected recent US accusations. Earlier this month, the United States alleged that China conducted an underground nuclear test in June 2020. US officials say seismic data from a remote station in Kazakhstan recorded a small explosion at China's LOP North test site, which they claim matches the characteristics of a nuclear blast rather than mining activity or a natural earthquake. However, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization says the data is too limited to confirm the cause of the events with certainty. Meanwhile, China has dismissed the allegation as entirely unfounded, describing it as a political attempt to justify renewed US nuclear testing. These claims by the US comes as President Donald Trump presses China to join the US and Russia in negotiating a replacement for the New START Treaty, which is the last strategic nuclear arms limitation pact between Washington and Moscow that reportedly expired on February 5 this year. Experts warn that the treaty's expiration could raise the risk of an accelerated global nuclear arms race, though others caution that these concerns may be overstated. Joining me now for this discussion is independent China strategist Andrew K.P. Leong. He joins us from Hong Kong. Mr. Leong, thanks very much for joining us. Firstly, how do you see the fact that it has taken US as many as 6 years to raise this alarm? Apparently, it alleges that the test was conducted in 2020. So why now in 2026 has it repeated that accusation?
Well, of course, the new nuclear arm testing ban between the United States and Russia is going to expire shortly. And of course, this raised alarm bells, not only between these two countries, but around the world. So this is fact number one. Fact number two, the current nuclear warheads nowadays are so destructive that they can destroy the whole world, let alone the two countries, the whole world, many times over, because they are multiple times more powerful than those dropped in Japan at the end of the Second World War. So I think that you look at the total number of warheads, nuclear warheads already stockpiled. Russia, according to some estimates, has 4,309 warheads. The latest warheads, don't forget, they are multiple times more powerful than those dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And the United States has 3,700, still a very substantial number. And China is about only 600. So China is now is multiple times the stockpile much lower. But as I said, these warheads are much more powerful, and it makes little sense of increasing the total number of stockpiles on the surface, because sometimes modern warfare, especially nuclear warfare, highlights the conundrum of the so-called first strike and second strike. The first strike is that a country tries to annihilate the stockpiles of his opponent. That's the first strike. But if there are sufficient warheads in different areas in the opponent, then the opponent can mount a counter-attack in the second strike. So this is theory. Although this theory assumes that either the first strike or any kind of exchanges wouldn't destroy the world over, as I highlighted earlier. So in that context, while Russia has got 4,309 modern warheads, US 3,007, and China 600. Naturally, China wants to restore the balance, if only to maintain the credibility of a second strike. Now, this does not say, it does not confirm that China in fact conducted a nuclear testing, because as I said, this war is already very, very powerful, multiple times more powerful than those dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So whether China in fact conducted the testing remains to be seen, but the whole thing has got to be looked at in the context which I've just outlined.
All right, sure. Should one really be skeptical about the end of the START treaty, because there are fears and concerns rising of countries rushing or racing for a nuclear arsenal, building, but CTBTO of course continues to say there's not enough evidence to suggest that.
Well, the other question in this discussion is related to the spread of nuclear arms around the world, as countries find that the only insurance policy against being bullied is to develop a nuclear weapon, especially small countries which are subject to US coercion. Think North Korea. For example, the Kim Jong-un regime has been fed up with the so-called six-party talks, and Trump's initial threat of fire and fury, followed by a handshake across the border with him. But at the end, it resulted in nothing. The United States refused to even ease any kind of sanctions against North Korea unless North Korea surrender all its nuclear weapons totally. Well, that's, of course, is not the way that the North Korea thinks what should be a kind of negotiation. And hence, the North Korea is now hell-bound to build up its nuclear armament capabilities together with long-range missile delivery systems. The fear is that if the nuclear testing is conducted by the US or Russia or even China, this could spur other countries to develop their nuclear weapons. And let's not forget that many countries are on the verge of reaching full capability of developing these weapons. And if that happens, this could stabilize a lot of the dynamics in the Asia Pacific, in the Southeast Asia, and in the Middle East and around the world. And that's no good for any countries, not for China, not for the United States, not for the world. And that's a much more important question to consider in this discussion over nuclear testing.
All right, Mr. Leong, thanks very much then for joining us with your assessment in this discussion. And we now move on. Viewers, Turkey's Parliamentary Peace Commission has finalized a draft report proposing a temporary legal framework for reforms tied to verified PKK disarmament. The reports call for redefining terrorism to exclude non-violent acts, strengthening free speech protections, and ending the practice of appointing government trustees over elected mayors in Kurdish majority regions. It also outlines the reintegration of former PKK members who laid down arms, while stressing there will be no blanket amnesty and that all cases must still go through judicial review. A standalone law would be introduced only after state authorities confirm full PKK disarmament. Critics warn that the process lacks enforcement powers and remains politically sensitive. Saul Satka is there with us in this discussion. He's a political commentator from Tel Aviv. Saul, Israel, of course, is raising alarms over this Turkey-Pakistan alleged nuclear access that it is saying, it is also saying could have the backing of Saudi Arabia. How critical is this, and what kind of threat does this really pose for the Middle East?
None at all, because the Pakistani nuclear program is very much under the watchful eye of the United States. If you recall, Pakistan is effectively a military dependency of the United States, and they couldn't absolutely do anything like that at all. This might be some kind of game on the part of Saudi Arabia and various other people to try and increase their leverage in various negotiations in relation to the Abraham Accords and the balance of power in the Middle East. That's all I can assume it is. But the Iranians are not going to be getting their nuclear bombs, and certainly the Saudis will not be either, not in any particular way, not via Pakistan. The Saudis do not have a functional expeditionary army that they could branch out. If they tried to do this, they would be coming right up against the people who supply all their weapons. If you recall, Saudi buys pretty much all the weapons that they have from the Americans. The Americans need to stay in their good books because otherwise they can't get the spare parts that you need to maintain all those very expensive and complex weapons, including the jets, which within 10 hours of flying time no longer function once your benefactor who provides them to you cuts you off. So all that is just this complete pie in the sky, and at the very most, it's a bluff to try and get something else out of some kind of negotiation. And to be honest, it's not even a good bluff, because it's totally without any credibility.
But it is it likely that Ankara's ties with Islamabad could fuel or foster Turkey's nuclear, advances?
I didn't catch that, sorry.
Is it also likely that Ankara's growing ties with Islamabad could fuel Turkey's nuclear ambitions?
It's possible, but the Turks, again, the Turks are going to watch in the near future as the Iranians pay the price for their nuclear adventures. And they will find that the benefit for them having a nuke is very, very low, and the cost for them to have a nuke is very high. And so as long as the leaders in Ankara are relatively logical, reasonable people, which they are, according to people I know who tell me that they are, a lot of the messaging that comes out of there is bluster for their own local population. There's no prospect that they're going to try and build a nuke or buy a nuke from Pakistan. Certainly that won't be allowed to happen. There are too many actors in the region who will prevent it.
Right, so I'll continue to stay on with me, viewers. We're now going to proceed. Now, former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has warned that Turkey under President Tayyip Erdogan is emerging as a new strategic threat to Israel. Speaking at the 2026 Conference of Presidents of major American Jewish organizations in Jerusalem, Bennett accused Ankara of trying to pull Saudi Arabia away from Israel and help form a hostile Sunni axis that he says includes nuclear-armed Pakistan. Bennett described Erdogan as a sophisticated and dangerous adversary seeking to surround Israel, linking Turkey, Qatar, and the Muslim Brotherhoods as part of a growing regional challenge. He said Israel must confront threats from both Tehran and Ankara. At the same time, Bennett also sharply criticized Israel's current leadership, saying it has divided the country and failed to prevent major disasters, and has signaled his intention to lead Israel into what he called its next chapter. Saul, you were just saying there is no reason for alarm whatsoever, but the former leader of Israel has issued that statement saying it's a huge cause of concern, while also, of course, condemning the leadership of Israel.
Right. Well, of course, he certainly is the chief opposition figure. So it's natural that within a democracy, the chief opposition figure will speak critically of the government. That's how democracies work. So that's not at all surprising. I certainly don't agree with him on the issue of Turkey being a long-term strategic threat. The Turks are going to be very tied down, let's say, over the next 50 years, because they have a minority population of Kurds who have allies on all their borders. And those Kurds are demanding gradually and increasingly independence. Those Kurds have a history of ethnic violence. They have been the subject of extensive killings and persecutions by the Turkish majority. And over the next 50 years, that Turkish majority is going to be gradually shrinking up until a point where towards the end of this century, there will no longer be a Turkish majority within the current borders of Turkey. And that is going to be the battle royale that the Turks are going to be facing. They certainly won't be having the energy or the ability even to start major wars with Israel, who has a vast strategic edge on them in terms of the technology in their weapons. And any attempt by the Turks, for example, to try and invade Israel would absolutely fall flat. And at the same time, Israel is not going to allow the game that the Iranians played, which was to build up proxy armies all around Israel's borders, to be done by anyone ever again. As in, anyone that tries to build up a proxy army on Israel's borders is going to find that proxy army quickly barred. And if that wants to be Turkey, if Turkey wants to try and play that game, they will find out how that works out for that proxy army.
Russia is also spending and working with Turkey, of course, on its nuclear plant. But talking about its arsenal, how close do we know, how close is Turkey really to its first bomb?
As far as I know, Turkey is not anywhere near close to its first bomb.
All right.
And as for the situation with Russia that was discussed before, the Russian empire, such as it is, we're going to see that gradually fall apart over the next decade, because they have simply burnt through their stockpile of military equipment that they took 50 or 60 years to build in their folly in Ukraine. And within the next couple of years, there really will be nothing left of it. They have run their economy into a terrible state of catastrophe and war dependence, and their population eventually it will suffer too much to allow this to continue. They have lost more than 1 million men on the battlefields to death, and hundreds of thousands or more to injuries that will stand with them for the rest of their lives and will require the maintenance of the Russian state, while the Russian population is shrinking because they're not having any kids anymore. And all their best and brightest have left because of the war, because they want to avoid conscription and almost certain death in a frozen field in Ukraine. So Russia is in very deep trouble. And if as Iran found out when Iran was attacked in June by Israel and then the United States, their ally, Russia, was not able to do anything to help them. They weren't even able to help them diplomatically, really. They didn't even bother saying anything. We saw the same in Caracas. A Russian ally, the leader of a Russian ally, was picked up by US special forces and taken to jail in New York. And what were the Russians able to do? Nothing. They couldn't even get their own oil out of Venezuela. The United States came and interdicted their oil shipments. The Russians are currently far too busy to be helping anyone. They can't help Caracas, and they can't help Tehran, and they certainly won't be able to help Ankara if Ankara decides to go in the Russian direction and effectively leave NATO.
All right. Saul, thanks very much then for joining us here with your assessment of the situation. Viewers, with that, we'll wrap up this edition of the World Report on News X World. Keep watching for all international news and updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing from topics from across the world. Today we turn our attention to an island state with a rather unique strategic significance, Mauritius. Situated at the heart of the Indian Ocean, Mauritius plays a key role in regional diplomacy, trade and security, from strategic partnerships with India to balancing relations with major powers and navigating the return of the Chagos Islands. Port Louis finds itself at the intersection of geopolitics and development. Joining me today is Mr. Minister Hambirajan Narsinghen, Junior Minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Regional Integration and International Trade of Mauritius. Thank you very much, Minister Narsinghen, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World.
Good afternoon, Ms. Prastiksha. It's a real pleasure for me to speak and to give you some explanations to you and to our Indian brothers and sisters.
Thank you. Now, moving to our first question, Minister Narsinghen. Mauritius may be a small island state, but it plays an active role in the diplomatic stage. So how would you describe Mauritius' foreign policy approach today, and what priorities are shaping its international engagements?
Yeah, I think you're right to mention that Mauritius is a small island state. This is very true, but at the same time, it is a dot in the Indian Ocean. But ever since its occupation by the Dutch, especially by the French, and subsequently by the British, you will see that Mauritius, as a small island, a small dot in the Indian Ocean, has always played a very, very important role because of its geographical position. Now, in spite of being a dot in the Indian Ocean, you will see that Mauritius is first and foremost an African state from a political and also for historical reasons. At the same time, it is situated in the Indian Ocean, a strategic location. It comprises 65% of people of Indian origin, but we've got the population hail also from Africa, from China, from France also, from different parts of the world. So Mauritius is a real melting pot, I would say. But in spite of the fact that it is small, what is also important, Mauritius is a big ocean state. It has extensive, vast areas of the ocean, and it is still underdeveloped, not fully developed. It has a lot of potential, which we have to unlock now. And you will see, you mentioned about our role in terms of diplomacy. Ever since independence, the father of the nation, Sir Sagar Ramgoolam, you will see, has been propounding a policy of neutrality. And our foreign policy, you will see, has been characterized by being a country which is non-aligned, very neutral, and we believe in a policy of non-interference. We are friends with everybody. We did not have enemies, and we don't want to have any enemies. And if you look at our national anthem, you will see that there is a very important part in that anthem, which says that in peace, justice, and liberty. So peace is a central point. Locally, there is peaceful coexistence among all the different groups, communities, and religions in Mauritius. But also, if it is firmly anchored in Mauritius, but also at the level of the international scene, the father of the nation and the actual Prime Minister, Dr. Navin Chandra Ramgoolam, both son and father, they have been advocating this very important policy. And different governments with different other prime ministers, you will see there has been a sort of consistency in terms of this sort of approach, in terms of this policy, which has paid its dividends. And whether the Western world, India, and other countries, even Russia and all countries, I think appreciate this stance of Mauritius at the international scene. So in spite of being small, we play a very strategic role in the Indian Ocean. We have the Indian Ocean Commission and the Indian Ocean Rim at the level of the Indian Ocean. But we also play a very important role in Africa through a number of African Union, first and foremost, but also through two important economic treaties, trade agreements. One is the SADC agreement, and the second one is COMESA, and one which is still at its budding stage, the AFCFTA. So Mauritius plays a very leading role, and we are a sort of coordinator for many of these African frameworks, but also at the level of other countries like the ACP group. Mauritius has always been playing a very, very important role. At the international level, in all international organizations, we have just been elected